Now from the App Store and Google Play.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
7:30 this morning, Monday morning. You're very welcome along to OTB AM. It's Ger Gilroy and Owen Sheehan with you, as we are every morning from 7:30 all the way through until 10 o'clock here on OTBM. If you want to get in touch with us, you can WhatsApp the show. 087 9180 180 is the number to send any of your messages through to, or indeed you can use the hashtag OTBAM on Twitter. It's been wall-to-wall coverage of the life and times of Jack Charlton since the news broke on Saturday morning, and to be honest, we're not going to do that much different for you this morning. There's a little bit of Barry Geraghty talk with Hector Ó a little bit later on. The news about Manchester United, the news about Manchester City, Freudian slips a go-go, is going to break at 9:30 this morning, and whether or not there'll be any Champions League football for them at any point in the next 2 seasons at least, we'll find out today. But Owen, one of the things that I was interested in was what the Jack Charlton era means for you, who were too young to actually remember it happening or not around for most of it.
This is the interesting thing. People get often asked about their earliest sporting memory, and it's easy to kind of pick something from our generation as like Robbie Keane's goal and the television being brought into the classroom to watch that. And a lot of people under the age of 30 might remember that as their first big football moment from an Irish sense. But I actually often wonder if seeing Ray Houghton's goals, seeing the scenes from Stuttgart or Italia 90 is actually my earliest sporting awareness, despite having not lived through it, because of the repetition, because of reeling in the ears, because of the countless football television specials. Like, I often wonder, did I know Jack Charlton's name before I knew Robbie Keane or Roy Keane or Mick McCarthy's name? Like, it just feels that everything that I knew about Irish football from the very early days was just standing on the shoulder of the Jack Charlton era. And it just kind of shows how much we clinged to that era, how important that era was, how everything that came afterwards was based on the foundations of that era, that I often think that possibly the first goal that I was aware of seeing on television was Ray Houghton's goal, and I wasn't even alive for it.
Yeah, I think that's a fairly... obviously, it's such a big thing, and it has dominated all football ever since, because it's the foundational text, it's the new gospel, it's the start of the New Testament of Irish football. But like when I was a kid, the footage of Jimmy Barry Murphy that they played every Saturday afternoon whenever a match was rained off, which was all the time essentially, was the stuff that would have stuck in my head. And I didn't actually see him playing Gaelic football in particular, but there's famous Micheál O'Hare commentary of him that just becomes this kind of implant in your brain. It's like, that's not in any way in my sporting memories, because this is the 70s before I was born. And but from a football fan's perspective, how did you actually think on that era? Was there a little bit of, would they ever stop banging on about that? It seems like ancient history, or did it feel alive and vital enough and recent enough for you to think, okay, we're still in this era?
100%, or no, not that we're still in this era. It felt that we're still within reaching distance of this era. It takes a while for that sense of history to get chipped away, for you to suddenly grow up and realise that, hold on a minute, this is possibly the greatest ever era of Irish football, and everything you will witness may not be as good as that. Like, it's interesting, like I saw reference yesterday that to get a greater appreciation of the Jack Charlton era, like, you could have watched back some of the old games that were on TG Cahir over the last few weeks. But I'm not sure if I actually buy that. I think getting a great appreciation of the Jack Charlton era is actually watching Reeling in the Ears, is actually seeing people dancing at roundabouts, seeing 500,000 people in Dublin, welcome home the team. It is seeing grown men crying, people who probably only shed sporting tears when their GAA club won a county title. Like, they're the scenes that showed you why this mattered, not necessarily watching them draw 1-1 with England and Cagliari. You know, it is about so much more than what just happened on the pitch. But yeah, there was definitely a period of time where you're like, those days are coming back again. This is what it means to be Irish, you know, put them under pressure and all that sort of thing. And suddenly you realise that actually, no, this is very much history and slowly becoming ancient history, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that is, was there a sense when you were watching this that you wish you'd been alive for it, or did it?
Oh yeah.
At the time, you kind of are aware enough at 8 and 10, going, "Geez, I can't believe I missed this."
Kind of, yeah. But certainly when you get older, I think the older you get, the more FOMO sets in, and you're like, God, I really wish I was around for this. Like, I think probably when you're a kid, I speak for everybody here, you kind of have this hopeless sense of optimism, which is like, oh, well, we're definitely going to have this again. We're definitely going to be able to experience this. I can't wait for my moment where 500,000 people are going to be lining the streets welcoming home an Ireland team. Will it ever happen?
It turns out you came in at the end. You missed all the good stuff. You're like Tony Soprano.
Exactly. Took up the gauntlet at the very wrong time. But like, yeah, like at the same time, I wonder, even regardless of the potential success of future Irish teams, there's obviously something about the time he came in as Ireland manager that was just a perfect manager. That success coming in at the late 80s in a country that was a relatively hopeless place to be. Like, I think it had the perfect conditions for the entire country to be taken on the crest of a wave for a few years. It could still happen one day down the line with that level of success, but I'm not sure with the complete release of emotion be on the same level.
Our parents' generation who lived through the 1980s, it was absolutely grim. Like, the oil crisis, insurance or interest rates were like double digits. So your mortgage was going up by 10 to 15%. It was expanding in value every year by 10 to 15%, as opposed to now where interest rates are very low, where at least when you got locked into your negative equity, the numbers stayed relatively similar. But for our parents, it was like their salaries were getting eroded week on week on week by the fact that the banking scenarios around the world were completely out of control, and there was no kind of sense of somebody, a guiding hand at the tiller who was going to be able to rescue this. Unemployment was rampant, immigration was rampant, divorce, they were trying to get it legalised, but they just couldn't. It was like we were still run by the church, essentially. We were run by the church and Fianna Fáil. And towards the end of the 80s, our football team suddenly had this very cosmopolitan representation. When you think about it, we had 2 black players in the team in Ireland in the 80s. And that was, not a common thing for anything that represented Ireland. We could point to the famous black Irish people and count them on one hand. That's the kind of lack of diversity that there was in our society. And all of a sudden, this team was playing in sun-kissed, glorious middle of Europe, where European immigrants, Irish people, could get in a car and drive. It took them a day and a half to get to Stuttgart, and they could suddenly be represented on the world stage by a team who went and beat England. Like, just as the country begins to liberalise a little bit and to free itself from the shackles of 40 years of mismanagement, and so I don't think the football team kickstarts the economy. I think that the football team happens at around the same time as an unbelievably young population. The education system kicks in, and we have multi-generations of people who have third-level education, and some of whom have travelled around the world and come back and gone, I'm going to try and make this place a little bit better. And at that moment, there's the beginning of optimism about who we might be as a country. We might not just be defined by the constant news on the telly every night of atrocities in the north. That the football can mean something that we can all rally behind in a way that we couldn't really rally behind any other, so you two were just starting. Sorry, they weren't just starting. They had broken America by the time the football team actually got good in '88. And I don't know, these are all little parts of the same constituent story. I think that's kind of the other thing here, is that the football itself, you're right, is unbelievably important, because that's the thing that gets the fans out and gets them all celebrating and sees them travelling the world. But it's also less important than the cultural impact of the team.
Without question. It's about what Jack Charlton did, what this team did to influence the happiness, the mood of a nation. It is such a cliche to say the mood of a nation hinges on certain things. But there is literal video evidence from the archive that shows that the mood of the nation went on a massive spike as a result of what a sports team did. Another annoying cliche is something that transcends sport, but that very thing is proof of a team that transcended sport, that infiltrated every aspect of Irish society. Everybody's parents knew the players, the management, team. I'm not sure an Irish sports team can be that household an entity in Irish society again. I'm not sure if anything can get to that level. I think it's just a perfect marriage of all these sorts of things. And like you mentioned, all those people who went around the world and came back and tried to make Ireland a better place. Imagine all the people, the countless hordes of Irish people all around the world watching 88 and 90 and 94 unfold. Imagine their pride. They wouldn't have been able to congregate at a number of 500,000 people in the main thoroughfare of the city they were in. But imagine the pride that they had when they were gathering in their dozens in pubs or in houses to watch the World Cup or the European Championships. That is an unbelievable level of pride. And I think in some ways the Irish team of that era is indicative of that. You know, second generation Irish people who were the sons or grandsons of immigrants. That is the perfect epitome of what Ireland is all about, coming back to don the green of Ireland. And there may be question marks about how Irish some of them felt. But to me, it doesn't actually really matter whatsoever. It matters that they came back, they realised to some degree, and as a nation, we could all identify with it so much. And there's no question about it. There was just an unbelievable pang of jealousy that many of us weren't around to actually witness it. It is the one moment you'd love to go back and see. Like, Jack Charlton was the most famous man associated with Ireland for a long, long time there. You mentioned U2. He was more famous than Bono. He was the most famous honorary / Irishman that existed in the 1990s.
Yeah, I'd say Bono. I'd say Bono's global level of celebrity was pretty high at that stage. But certainly, another generation might have had Conor McGregor as the most famous person associated with sport in Ireland, and our generation were fairly lucky in that it was Jack's team and Jack Charlton, and like there are so many different aspects of his legacy to get into. In many ways, I'm actually delighted that there was somebody in the role of national adjutant who was like, hang on a second, this could be better, which was the role that Dunphy was playing during the whole thing, and like we're going to talk about this a little bit later on. Listening to John Giles on Saturday talking about it, that they were friends beforehand and they were friends after, but when John had a job to do to talk about the quality of the football, he just did his job, and himself and Jack never fell out over that, even when he had to question the role of the football. But there was a brilliant bit, I don't know if you heard it, on Saturday, where Giles was telling John Duggan about like what it was like to play in front of him, and himself and Bremner would come back to get the ball off Jack, and Jack would tell him, get up the pitch, I can do what you do, and then he'd kick it in the stand.
Yeah, that's the story that Clive Tilsley told as well on social media on Saturday. The hoofing, instructing Bobby Moore to just hoof it anywhere, and instead he picked out the perfect pass for England to go 4-2 up in the 1966 World Cup final, and that no-nonsense attitude. Like, it's amazing like how self-aware Jack Charlton was of his abilities as a footballer. Like, he seemed to downplay his technical ability more than any other footballer I've ever seen. Now, it helps that he had an unbelievably illustrious post-playing career, that he's been interviewed so many times and spoken about his playing career so many times. But, like, we don't need to make the point that he was perhaps less talented than his brother Bobby, because he has made that point thousands of times in interviews himself. He will always be the first person to point out that, he was a late bloomer in his footballing career, in his playing career, and that he wasn't as gifted as as the majority of those teammates in that starting team in the 1966 World Cup final. But just the persistent pointing it out of it, there was just such a deep-rooted honesty in the man that he couldn't get away from.
Yeah, 100%. 087 918 180 is the number to WhatsApp us if you've got any Jack Charlton memories you want to get off your chest, any thoughts, any musings on the weekend. It was an emotional weekend for all the Ireland football fans, really, because it kind of comes at the end of an orgy of nostalgia, and all of a sudden you realise that it all meant something, that it wasn't just watching this stuff endlessly for no reason, that you were learning history, and one of the key figures in that history passed away on Saturday. And so there's been a celebration of his life, and that's exactly as it should be. It was an incredible life. That has this level of success on the playing field that then, I don't know if it's better. I mean, certainly from our perspective, what Jack Charlton did in reaching a quarter-final versus England winning the World Cup on home soil in '66, I mean, they stand beside each other. And maybe it's wrong to compare these things, but I'm going to talk with, we're going to hear from Brian Kerr in just a moment. Across Saturday and Sunday's OTB, we had a huge cast as well. We're going to bring you some of that in just a little while. I want to tell you what's coming up on the show this morning. Gary Breen was 17 in 1990, and so he's going to talk to us about what it was like growing up an Ireland fan in England in '88 and in 1990, and then obviously joining the squad around '96. So he comes just after the defeat at Anfield, and I think he's very early on, maybe even in Mick McCarthy's very first squad in 1996. So he's going to join us around about 8:15 to give us his thoughts on that. We might talk some Premier League stuff as well. A relatively interesting weekend in terms of the Premier League, and obviously the Manchester City decision is coming at 9:30 this morning. Our brand new Gillette pressure rankings. Ordinarily we're going to be talking about teams and people and sports events that are under pressure. This week we're going to obviously have a Jack Charlton special and talk about the various people who came under pressure from Big Jack over the course of his brilliant career. At 8:45 we're bringing sports pages. It is the final week for our BMW Run and Ride for Pieta. We're going to be doing a duathlon on Friday morning live on OTB AM. Somebody has to present, so Owen decided not to do it because he hates charity. And Man City, going to talk about that from 9:20 up to about 9:40. And then Hector Ó is going to join us because Barry Geraghty retired over the course of the weekend. And Barry Geraghty, one of those people that Hector put on Meade's Mount Rushmore. So we figured no better man to pay due deference to an unbelievable career, and it has been, obviously, I think a lot more would have been made of Barry Geraghty's career over the last few days if Jack Charlton hadn't passed away at the weekend as well. Now, Brian Kerr joined us yesterday, obviously, in a live commentary of the North London Derby on OTB Sports. Going to be talking about the passing of Jack Charlton. We'll get his opinion there as well. But first, here he is with Stephen Doyle.
Well, the North London Derby has finished 2-1 to Tottenham Hotspur, a very late winner from Toby Alderweireld. And I know you spoke to Joe in good detail, Brian, before and after the game about Jose Mourinho and Tottenham, but he was under a little bit of pressure going into this match, mainly from supporters. Does this game or this result give him any breathing space?
Well, I think that pressure is diminished by the fact there's no crowds at the games, so there's no obvious given out. Obviously, there might be a lot of stuff in the press and in the media, social media. Today is an important day for him in that, you know, to beat Arsenal, who are their biggest rivals in many ways, but the truth of it is that they went into the match today 10th in the table for a team who were in the Champions League final last year. They've lost 11 league games this year. They lost 13 league games last year. They're a worse team now by far than they were last year. It certainly would have lifted pressure. I'm not sure whether he was feeling the pressure. I'm sure he's feeling he needs to do better and the team needs to do better. So it was important result from that point of view. It edges them closer to Sheffield United in terms of qualifying for the Europa League. I think that's the limit of their ambition now. Unfortunately, whether they really want to make it to the Champions League, I'm not so sure they do. But that's where they're at the moment. You know, if they could finish off the season with a few wins, everyone would be a bit happier. But they weren't very good today. But they just did enough to sneak it in the end, though Arsenal dominate possession. Before we look at Arsenal, I suppose when you look ahead to next season, and Mourinho signed a long-term deal there with Tottenham, you know, it all comes down to Daniel Levy and him loosening the purse strings. He's going to have to give Mourinho money to invest in playing staff if they're to have any chance next season, you would think, of competing for titles. Well, they're miles away from competing for anything at the moment. I mean, they haven't won any trophy in 12 years. Competing for the league, they finished out of Arsenal the last few years, and they've They finished second a couple of seasons ago when they should have really won it when going back to Leicester winning it, and they finished in the top 4. But they're a long way off the top 4 the way they've been playing this season. The team needs a bit of revitalisation. It was an ageing team. There's not much youth has come into it in recent times. But where's that money going to come from now that they're not going to be in the Champions League next year? They obviously their income has dropped sizably with the fact that there's no crowds at the matches, and obviously there's a huge debt on the stadium still. They borrowed a huge amount of money this year in terms of paying off the stadium. So the only way they're going to generate money is if they sell some players. Will they end up selling Harry Kane and using that money to rebuild the team? Didn't go very well when they sold Bale last time out and got 7 players instead of him, and very few of them worked out too well for them. Lamella's probably the only ones that's still around. But so I think it's a troubling time for Spurs, a troubling time for the supporters. If they lose Harry Kane, where are they going to get someone that scored the goals that he has scored for them for the last 5 seasons? Very scarce.
Now, if you look at Arsenal, Mikel Arteta comes into that job. He'd never managed a club before. It was a bit of a shot in the dark, maybe to some extent, although we do know he had good coaching credentials from his time working under Pep Guardiola at Manchester City. Now, he has shown with Arsenal that perhaps he can work with limited resources. But again, if Arsenal want to get into competing for top 4 places, he's going to need to be backed by the top brass at Arsenal. And as well as that, like there's talk of maybe a couple of players wanting to leave, Bellerin, Kolasinac. So there's definitely a rebuilding project there for Arteta. Will he be back, do you think, by the club?
Well, I think a lot of players have been on trial under Arteta since he's come in. They haven't performed before he was there. That's why he got the job. Emery was sacked. And now that he's in, he's looking at them very close. He's made his mind up on Ozil. They want to get him off the wage bill. If he's getting 350 grand a week, it looks like he's made his mind up on Guendouzi, although I think there's a player there. There's a player in him and a lot of potential. He's still a very young lad. He's only 22, but he's obviously making a point with him. He's not picking him. He's not on the bench. He's got a clear view of the game and a clear view of the behaviour he expects from the players. I think there will be an overhaul at Arsenal again of players. I don't think there'll be a queue of clubs wanting Kolasinac given those performances for Arsenal. He was signed as a left back, left wing back. Now he's playing left centre back of 3. You saw him today. Dreadful mistake in the goal. Always has looked cumbersome from it to me. It doesn't look particularly well balanced, or it doesn't have the agility for playing as a wing back either. The modern mobile wing back like Tierney gives him now. But I think Bellerin's a good player. He's been out injured all year, but it just shows principles that players don't seem to have any now. The club have had to play him when he's been out injured for a lot of the last 2 seasons. But a player can just say, oh well, my contract's running down next year, I'm off. But I think he's a good player. I think he's one they'd want to keep. I think they want to keep Ceballos. But I think there's plenty of room for manoeuvre for him for buying and selling, and also I think that there will be money made available to him this year. They spent big money on Pepe. It wasn't his call. A lot of money for a lad of potential, a bit of a one-hit wonder last season, scored loads of goals in France, but he hasn't reproduced that form. He may produce next year, but I think they have more room for manoeuvre on spending and adjustment of the squad than Spurs have.
And crucially, they still have an avenue into the Champions League through winning the Europa League.
That's a possibility. And crucially, they've also developed some very good young players of real potential, like Saka and Willock. We saw him coming into the game today, and several more who are on the fringes of it, who have got good experience this year and look like they'd be good backup players, if not starters.
So then, as a manager, do you think Arteta's been impressive?
Yeah, but look, Mourinho has won things. He's been an exceptional manager, and he's won things everywhere he's been. The job he did at Porto, Chelsea, Inter Milan, it made him. He was rightfully considered as the best club manager around at that time. It hasn't gone well for him at Manchester United. He still won things at Manchester United. Won the Europa League, won the Cup. Was it what he win the League Cup? Did he? I mean, win the Cup or the League Cup? He won the Europa League. So he's won. I think he's a bit away with that with the squad he's inherited. Spurs. He said all the right things about them, but they look way short for me at the moment. And went out with the cups tamely this year, has to be said. So I think Arteta has more to play with, I'd say, at the moment.
So I wanted to ask you about Everton as well, Brian. They had a bad defeat. I know, they're going to stay in the Premier League. They're not worried about relegation, but again, they've nothing to play for either. I was just looking, the journalist Daniel Storey tweeted after their 3-0 defeat to Wolves that the players used by Everton today cost a total of £260 million. Now, that's a massive amount of money for a club like Everton to have spent, and their supporters must be looking at clubs like Sheffield United, like Wolves, coming up from the Championship, even Leicester City, if you go back another few seasons, who, I know their achievement was, a once in a lifetime almost. But it must be so frustrating for supporters to see that they've got an owner there, Moshiri, who's willing to spend money, but they've just got this bunch of players that just don't seem to be able to achieve anything, and they just seem to be constantly in a state of just mid-table flux.
Yeah, and change of managers. Yeah, and now they've got in one of the great managers, the great achievers as a player and as a manager, and a very good guy, and Ancelotti. Seamus Coleman came out very strongly after the match. He was harsh on himself and harsh on the other players and harsh about their attitude. You talk about the amount of money you spent, the amount of money was misspent. I remember at the time saying the money they spent on Sigurdsson, he was far too overpriced. Now, a good steady player, but without great pace, and he's getting on a bit as well. I think he was 27 at that stage, 28. He was at Swansea. He'd been around the league, scored goals from set pieces. He's a kind of a number 10 type player. He's not a real central midfield player. He's not a wide player. He's not quick enough to play centre forward. But they spent 50 million on him 2 or 3 seasons ago. Alex Iwobi, kind of a fringe player, Arsenal with a fair bit of potential, but hadn't delivered on a consistent basis. Not a huge goal scorer. Another one up around the 40 million mark. Several other players were bought a few centre forwards. Tosun, the Turkish lad, he's out on loan now with Crystal Palace, out injured. Another one, spent big money for him. But lots of other players like that who haven't performed. So, what Everton need is somebody making decisions on the recruitment side who makes good decisions in combination with the manager and spend money wisely. I mean, that's what Liverpool have done. They've spent out, they've paid out usually for the positions. They need the goalkeeper and need a centre half, and they spent very expensively. They've also blended in some of the players that they had there very well and some of their own young players. But lots of clubs make big mistakes and spending, something to get away with it. Manchester United can get away with this, sign lots of players, make some mistakes, but didn't make a mistake. Fernandes looks like he's been a really good signing. Suddenly Pogba looks like he's a player again. But they've a lot to do. Everton, so they've got 3 really strong things going for them. They've got a very good manager, they've got a very wealthy owner, and they've got a great tradition. But the performances, and he's been trying to play some of the younger players. I mean, Davies around the middle of the field, Calvert-Lewin up front. He scored more goals this year. What's he on, about 14, which is more he's got the last 3 seasons put together. Richarlison, another one they spent a lot of money on, a bit moody, not consistent. But they've got a good manager now, and they've got that tradition. They've got ambition about a stadium, but at the moment the team just isn't good enough.
And you wouldn't be critical of Ancelotti. You think he's probably done as well as he can with the players he has?
I don't think he's done as well as he can, but I think he's very much at a stage of looking at the characters he has and evaluating them and deciding on whether they're going to be part of his plans for next season. And until he has a bit of time to sort it out, I mean, he's Moise Keane was another one who was foisted on him. I don't think, did they borrow him? He's on loan from Juventus.
Well, he was bought.
He's bought, and they spent a lot of money on him as well. He's another one. So young player with potential, but only with potential, paid a huge amount of money. Not a consistent goal scorer, not a regular in the Juventus team. So I think his evaluation of players will be much better than what's gone on prior to him coming into the club. I think he's using this time to assess them. He's playing some of the young players, giving you Anthony Gordon, giving him a go, experimenting with systems a little bit as well. Gomez in the middle of the field has come back from injury, the awful injury against Spurs, but very one pace in the middle of the field. And young Davies is one pace as well, so that's an area where they need more energy. Lost Idrissa Gueye, haven't really replaced him. I know they've got some midfield players out injured as well, so he needs time.
Keep the faith, Everton fans. Just to touch on a couple of things there before we finish, Brian. Look, Manchester City, day of reckoning for them tomorrow. Let's look at the worst case scenario. If they do lose their status as Champions League team and don't get that qualification place for next season, if they're banned for the next 2 seasons, would you be worried for Man City? Would Guardiola leave? Would De Bruyne leave? How many,
I think a lot will depend on how the rest of the season goes. I mean, I have them as one of the favourites for the Champions League this year, give it that the draw was tough, but the draw was always going to be tough if you're in this stage of it. If they can get by Real Madrid, they have to be one of the favourites. And if they won the competition this year, would that affect Guardiola's thinking that he's achieved that with them? I think I think there would be something about him that would say, well, I'll stick this out now. We've been harshly treated. If they're out of the Champions League for 1 year, I think he would stick with it. And then what would they be like in the Premier League next year if they don't have to play in the Champions League? I mean, I said last season, I think lots of people said that Liverpool won the trophy that Manchester City wanted to win, and vice versa, and Liverpool won the Champions League. This year it could go the way that they both really wanted. Liverpool to win the league. Liverpool have won the league. Manchester City to win the Champions League, it's going to be a harder task than where they are. But I think that would be very satisfying for him and for them as a club. I don't think it's going to affect their finances. There seems to be unlimitless amount of money there. They haven't been spending too wildly in the last season or two. I think the financial fair play has held them back a little bit. They do need to do a bit. Looks like Aguero's time might be running down. Not certain that Jesus is going to be good enough. Certainly the centre-back problem is one they've got to deal with. Might need a replacement for Silva in the middle of the field, although Bernardo Silva can fill in there. Sterling is getting even better.
Foden's improving as well, yeah. Yeah,
Foden is the one young player that looks like he's ready to start on a regular basis. So, even if it goes against them, I don't think it'll have that much of an effect. I think they can survive the financial loss, and it might bring back their focus on the Premier League and help to have a real battle next year with maybe more than just Liverpool. And Manchester United seem to be getting their act together. Chelsea should be the better of a longer time with Frank Lampard in control, and we might have a more competitive league.
And Brian, look, I know you spoke really well before the match kicked off about Jack Charlton, and I suppose just the fact that maybe he didn't put enough love into League of Ireland football and showing that kind of thing. But overall, I know you spoke really well about Jack and just kind of the influence he had on football in the country, and perhaps inspiring people by the team's performances and that kind of thing. You did, in case anybody missed it, I know you had one interesting interaction with him over in Sheffield many years ago.
Yeah, well look, first of all, my sympathies go out to Jack's family. I think they're well aware of the great service he gave to Irish football, and it's been the talk of the country for the last couple of days, and will probably continue so for next week, and rightfully so. It was an amazing time for people that love football prior to the Jack Charlton era, and for those that didn't love football until that era and became part of the converted and the new fans. And that was good for the game. It was great for the game. The style of football wasn't brilliant, but the days were great, and the excitement around the matches, and the inspiration that was there for people to get involved in the game, for people to pick up the coaching book, for kids to start playing, for kids to dream about playing for Ireland at some level. That had a major influence on the development of Irish football. My experiences the earliest times were I was at the World Cup in 1966. People are probably bored with the story now, and I saw all England's matches, and I saw Big Jack and his brother winning the final against West Germany 4-2. My next involvement was in 1983 with the Irish youth team playing at the European finals under Liam Toohey. Myself and Noel O'Reilly were the assistants. We'd been at the finals in Finland the year before, qualified again 83. We were based around the Yorkshire area. We were staying in Sheffield, and we got the use of Sheffield Wednesday's training ground. Jack was the manager, and I remember at the end of one of the training sessions we were wrapping up and collecting up the bibs and the balls. That's what we would have had at the time. We might have had a few cones as well, and BBC, as Noel used to call them, the balls, bibs and cones. But however, our gear was quite an indication that we might have been the Irish football team. It had Ireland on the back of them, and they were all green. But I remember Liam rambling over towards Jack, and he was about to approach Jack and thank him for the use of the training ground, because Sheffield Wednesday's first team were training at the same time. And Jack said to Liam, he confused us with the Northern Ireland, and he said to Liam, how was Billy doing then? Thinking that Liam knew Billy Bingham very well. I was close to Billy Bingham. But anyway, Liam in his own inimitable style said, I'd say he's doing great. I haven't seen him for a long time. And Jack looked a bit confused at this answer, didn't cop it. But within a couple of short years, he was actually manager of the Republic of Ireland. So it was a funny one. But look, I had other contact with Jack after, when he was in the dressing room the night in Leeds, and we were playing England in the group game, European qualifiers in '85, and Jack came in at half time on Liam's team talk, and Jack took over and told the team basically to start building the ball up the pitch, which was the total opposite of what Liam Toohey would have indoctrinated into his players. Liam loved the passing game. He loved having lads in the middle of the field that could get on the ball and pick a pass and link up and cross it. And Jack had a go at half time, and I knew it was the end of the Toohey's Tots era, which was a great era in Irish football. And after the match, Liam went to Jack Kelly, Lord rest Jack, he was the secretary at the time, and told him that was it, he was done. And it was very sad for all of us, because we'd had great success. Liam was a great man, great football man, part of the brilliant Shamrock Rovers, 6 in a row, cup winning teams, managed Shamrock Rovers, played for Newcastle, managed Ireland. It was a sad way for his era with those youth teams to play. It wasn't a night I like to think back on, but Jack was then in charge, and Irish football was changed forever in terms of the profile of the game and the numbers playing the game, the numbers of clubs that sprouted up all around the country as a result of those remarkable days of '88 in Germany, 1990, Italia 90, and USA 94, and they were great times. For us who worked in the League of Ireland at the time, we were a bit left out of some of the parties, because Jack was no admirer of the League of Ireland or the people that were involved in it, and it wasn't part of his brief, it appears, from the FAI to show any interest in any other part of the game. His job description was, can you win some matches for us with the senior team? And that's what he did, and that's what he did very, very well indeed. So it's a sad time.
Absolutely, and condolences to all of Jack's family. Brian, it's Crystal Palace against Manchester United for me and you on Thursday night, so we'll be chatting to everybody and off the ball then. Thanks very much.
Look forward to that one, Stephen.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
Looking for a football show with a bit of a twist?
So I know the likes of Griezmann's big into his fashion.
You wanted a lot. One question he actually asked me was, could he make his studs light up when he runs?
Team 33, the football magazine show for the football purists.
Yeah, the Nike Mercurials from 1998. If you just show that boot to an entire generation of people, and it is instantly nostalgic and remember everything from that era.
The very best interviews with the cult heroes of the past, and a look at the cultural side of football. Team 33. Live at 9 p.m. every Friday on OTB Sports Radio. Live 24/7 on the OTB Sports app.
Missing this?
Salah takes the shot. Oh, Mo Salah with one of the goals of the season. Unbelievable.
Then get this, the all-new OTB Sports app. Off the Ball, Ireland's premier sports channel, now has a new home, featuring the biggest names in Irish and world sports. Podcasts, interviews, news, commentary, analysis, plus almost 20 years of sporting archives. All free and ready when you are, at home or on the go. The new OTB Sports app. Download it now from the App Store and Google Play.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
10 minutes past 8 here on OTB AM. You've just been listening to Brian Kerr talking about his memories of Jack Charlton as well. 087 9180 180 is the WhatsApp number if you want to get in touch with us this morning. Or as ever, you can use the hashtag OTBAM on Twitter, or leave a comment on the YouTube stream, wherever or however you are accessing us this morning if you're listening to us on podcast. And the WhatsApp number is always live for you as well. Some of the comments coming through. Patrick McHugh says, as an Irishman that lives abroad and in multiple WhatsApp groups with friends from home, it was like a family member had passed away. Jack Charlton had a huge effect on a whole generation. Neil Garner says Jack was a great player but an even greater manager, RIP. Darren Ellis says another Leeds legend gone this year. Thanks for the memories these men left. And Craig Forsyth says you could always do a Mount Rushmore type monument of the Mourns, gigantic sculptures of giants of Irish history: Finn McCool, De Valera, Jack Charlton, Joe Schmidt and Brian O'Driscoll. What the hell is De Valera doing in the middle of all that? I mean, I don't know, mate. Not for me, Craig. Not for me. No thanks. Man who, anyway, ruined our country would be my take on that one. In a short 3-word summation, ruined our country for multiple generations, and you know, let the church run everything. But whatever you're having yourself, you can stick them on your own mountain. It's objective up to the point where you can't have De Valera on any mountains. 12 minutes past 8 this morning, Owen. How are you?
Yeah, good to get into a bit of Civil War politics at 8:11 on a Monday morning.
I mean, you know, the Civil War's dead. We all made friends, apparently. Now they're all in government at the same time. And what a great job they're doing so far, eh? What a great job, Owen.
Yeah, yeah, look, let's not get into this.
No, let's not.
Let's absolutely not get into this. I spent too much poring over some of the details yesterday and some horrific interviews. But anyway, go on.
Well, I don't know. I don't know, when you heard the news, what impact did it have on you?
Well, what impact does it have on anybody? I guess it's just like this true sadness that's unfortunately become kind of a real thing over the last few months, really, hasn't it? And like, God, you wake up to the news on Saturday morning and it's just this unbelievable level of outpouring over the last couple of days, which I'm not sure anybody else who is involved in Irish society could possibly have garnered.
Well, look, let's not go looking for... Anyway, yeah. I agree. There's a special place for somebody who has the impact that Big Jack has, you know. And I think particularly coming at the end of the 4 or 5 months that we've all had, it was like this kind of outpouring of emotion that everybody's ready for as well in some ways. It's 13 minutes past 8. We're going to get to Gary Breen in a moment, but I just want to remind everybody about the amazing stuff that happened in terms of people just paying their testimony to the involvement that they had with Jack's life and the influence that Jack had over them. So Graeme Souness, John Giles, Jason McAteer, Kevin Moran, Mick McCarthy, Ray Houghton, Brian Kerr, Mark Lawrenson and Kevin Sheedy. You can see all of their interviews. You can listen to them all now on the OTB Sports app. Just search for OTB Sports and you can download it in the Play Store and in the App Store right now. Them and loads of other people as well, including brilliant stories from various people who just kind of bumped into Jack and who met him at various functions right around the country. One of the things that struck me as well from what John Giles said was he was a brilliant after-dinner speaker. He never felt nerves. You know, it was just, he was who he was, and so therefore you were going to either get on with him or you weren't, but it wasn't going to be up to him to decide, well, I'm going to try and influence you in this. It was up to you to decide, yes, I'm going to like this person as he is. Shane Hannon, good morning to you. 14 minutes past 8. How are you?
Not too bad, lads. Keeping well.
What's the hat?
I decided to wear the hat this morning just for Jack Charlton. I don't know if you can see it there. Hopefully you can. But these hats were quite famous in Monaghan back in the 90s when Jack's team were at their peak. It's the Town of Monaghan Co-op, so it's the choice of champions, the local milk here in Monaghan, and Jack Charlton's name and signature is on it. But these things, they used to give them away if kids in Monaghan could collect cartoon badges. Martin McNally, the intercounty or the referee who was on OTB AM recently, he tweeted me back last night and said he used to collect those cartoon badges, and the prize was you won one of these hats. So it's a bit of a cult item here in Monaghan, and you see people wearing them around every now and again, and you think, Jesus, they are just fantastic. But managed to get my hands on one quite recently, so it's a nice hat.
When the hipster fleshpot clubs of Dublin reopen, you'll be strutting in there wearing that, and everybody will be like, wow, look at that. And then they'll realise you were old enough to get it first time round, as opposed to wearing it ironically.
Yeah, it's true. But I mean, I watched a video last night. There was a great video on YouTube of Jack visiting the West End Hotel in Monaghan on, I think it was May '94, so just before the USA World Cup. And he's obviously, Town of Monaghan Co-op have something to do with his appearance there, because he's holding a glass of milk the entire time as he's walking around, chatting to kids, chatting to adults. So it's a really lovely video, and you can see the impact he had on people when he met them just by the reactions of young and old. So yeah, he'd be sadly missed.
There was a texter, I think it was a texter on Saturday, who said that they lived in Mayo, and I think before one of the World Cups, Jack did a fundraiser for the local Residents Association, and at this stage, like, he's the most famous man in Ireland. It might have been after one of the World Cups. So it's just like the local Residents Association. Jack, will you do a Q&A? And everybody comes, and he sits there and has a few pints and just tells stories about the World Cup. It's like unbelievably accessible. Not what Trapattoni would have done necessarily, not what Martin O'Neill was doing. You know, there's also, I think that's the other aspect of this, Owen, that there's a time and a period where apparently he would drink in the Hill 16 pub in town, that like he wanted a pub that was out of the way. I think it was Kieran Cunningham who was tweeting this, that he would look for pubs where he wouldn't get hassle, or he would be able to like not get mobbed by people. And the Hill 16 pub, which I think is on Gardner Street. Certainly, I don't know if it's exactly Gardner Street, or if it's certainly around Croker anyway, but you would not necessarily associate this. It's not like Keogh's or one of the famous pubs in town that has had books written about it. Jack,
not a tourist pub.
Jack was pretty comfortable in there, you know?
Yeah, is that where he went to watch England-Cameroon famously in 1990, where he gave out and scolded the Irish people who were cheering against the English on that day? Didn't like the old kind of inter-island rivalry that existed there. Like as somebody who would have had his own fair share of gripes with England and with the FA, that's kind of one of a long list of very, very famous, very well told anecdotes.
I didn't know that. I haven't heard that, actually. Honestly, I hadn't heard that.
I've seen it a couple of times. It was definitely relayed in the papers yesterday. Apologies to the journalist who relayed it, because there was just so much content to get through yesterday in the papers. But yeah, the scolding of Irish people when he had a pint in a pub after coming home from Italia 90 in Dublin. Not like, I presume, and from the tone of the piece, it was kind of like in jest, sort of telling off of the folk in the pub who were cheering against England. I mean, I guess that's one thing that wouldn't change. If England were playing Cameroon in the morning in a World Cup quarter-final, you'd probably still have a lot of people cheering for Cameroon in kind of in a nicely anti-English way, not in a sort of terrible anti-English way, I think it's fair to say. I'm not sure what it was like in 1990. Maybe it was a little bit different. I'm sure it was a tiny bit different. But yeah, like, I mean, God, there's so many different things you can talk about it. It's interesting that Shay mentions Monaghan. There's countless Mayo stories. It seems like every little pocket of Ireland has some sort of association with Jack Charlton, which is remarkable for a man who was not brought up in Ireland, who had to come over here and kind of indulge himself in Irish society and get to know the culture from top to bottom. It is kind of mad how it's a local story for every part of Ireland.
Well, it's St. Patrick, right? It's like St. Patrick coming over and uniting the warring factions. Like, that's it. There's a pathway here for the saints. And I think that kind of mysticism was something that, you know, you kind of, when you're in the middle of it, you're like, hang on, some weird's going on here. What's happening? And also bringing the children of Ireland back to the place where their parents were forced away by economic issues generations before that. Like, I think there's the story is so layered and so textured that it's almost impossible. And I think over the next while we're going to get to it. And look, it's a complicated legacy too for the League of Ireland fans, as Brian Kerr was talking about there. You know, Liam Toohey and that incident is viewed as a hinge moment for the style of football that we have played since. And again, all of this we should be chatting about it. It doesn't in any way diminish the man or the person that he was. Because the other thing that I very briefly want to talk about is that there was an interview done about if you hadn't been a footballer, you'd have been a minor and you'd have been out striking with him. Yeah, I bloody would have been. And so obviously supported the minor strikes, and also is like pictured at one stage working with Brian Clough to smash fascist supporters. Like, so at a time when the National Front were rising, he was standing forward and putting his name forward alongside Brian Clough to an anti-fascist thing as well. And you're like, this guy, you know, again, there's a brilliant piece. The Liam Mackey piece today is excellent because he's got a Johan Cruyff thing where Cruyff was like, Big Jack makes it known that he's only really interested in fishing and that football's not really his thing. But we know that when he's fishing, he's thinking about football. And this is Johan Cruyff, like the greatest football brain in the history of the game, impressed by Jack Charlton. You know, not a story that we would have told here because Jack Charlton was like bite, boot and bollock. And there was a bit of a caricature.
Yeah, 100%. Like this I'll make this point very quickly because we come back to it in our pressure rankings. But I think that there is often a misconception, and it's certainly something that I would kind of have a blurred vision of sometimes, is between being old school and being kind of reductive in your thinking. Those two things are not the same whatsoever. And we will be chatting about Dunphy and how Charlton was tactically.
Hold that thought for a second now. And Shane, I know you've got to go, but come back to us because we didn't even get your button off you yet because we went down a Jack Charlton rabbit hole, and I want to hear your memories too. So look, we'll let you go, Shane, and come back to us in a couple of minutes' time. Owen, sorry.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. Like, I think it kind of plays in nicely with what Johan Cruyff was saying there, or certainly the respect internationally that was had for Jack Charlton. Like, I think and it comes back to my earlier point, how watching the games is not enough. Watching the Ireland games from Italia 90, if you weren't around to experience it, is not enough. What you actually need is to get a whole sense of what football was like at the time, and how out there or how against the grain Jack Charlton was moving in terms of how he actually played the game or what his view on the game was. Because if you played the game like Jack Charlton did today, you'd be like, that's how Big Sam plays the game. That's how somebody trying to stay in the Premier League would play the game. But that's not true in 1988. That's not true in 1990. Like, Miguel Delaney had a great line in his piece yesterday about how Jack Charlton was looking at the 1986 World Cup and said to himself, there's nothing new here. There's nothing innovative here. And that is where the put him under pressure style of play actually came from. That just because it may seem rudimentary or it may seem old school from our point of view today does not mean that it was very rudimentary back then. It may have been tough, it may have been rough, it may not have been pretty on the eye, but it was innovative. It 100% was innovative at the time, and that's certainly something that I've struggled with to kind of come to understand over time, was that just because somebody was playing football that was not pretty on the eye does not automatically mean that it wasn't full of innovation.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's also international football. Every team doesn't play great from game to game to game to game because they play so few matches together and partnerships don't get the opportunity to build. But like, we played loads of good football and loads of big games as well. We played really brilliant football against Russia in the 1-1 draw in Euro 88. We played really good football for large portions of the game against Italy at home in a World Cup quarter-final. Like, we played really well in that game. Just because we didn't play well in the Egypt game and the Norway game. And I think a lot of people kind of forget that the team played loads of good football in the middle of all this as well. But, you know, by the standards of watching the highlights of every game now, where people frequently don't actually watch 90 minutes, they see highlights and they go, oh, that guy's absolutely amazing. Look at the 5 things he did in the game. The rest of the game, you know, people make mistakes. It's 90 minutes of football and very, very, very high stakes games as well. So, look, it's 23 minutes past 8 here this morning. If you want to get in touch with us, please do. And OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. We don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters. I'm delighted to say we've got Gary Breen with us this morning. Gary, there's loads of stuff in the Premier League happening and some very good narratives to speak about. But to be honest, I kind of just want to talk about Jack Charlton for now. So I'm really interested in what it was like for you growing up, being an Ireland fan, as Ireland played England in '88 and 1990, just as your football career is reaching a point where you're like, I'm going to be able to do this professionally?
Yeah, well, listen, you kind of think that when you see that team of '88, '90 and the heroes, they're the pioneers, and you want to be a footballer, you're desperate to play for Ireland, but I put them on such a pedestal because it was interesting on Saturday. It came on the news in the morning prior to the announcements about Jack that it was the anniversary of the 1982 World Cup. And I remember that vividly, Paolo, Dino Zoff, those type of guys for Italy and how good they were. And then suddenly you go into 84 with France, 86 in Mexico, and we're not there. And I'm an Arsenal fan growing up as a kid in London, big Ireland fan, and we've got O'Leary, we've got Brady, we've got Stapleton. Then I'm thinking about Lawrence and Whelan at Liverpool and those iconic 80s Liverpool's team. I'm thinking, well, why are we not there? I just couldn't understand it as a young kid, as a teenager, thinking, so you kind of put World Cups and major finals on a pedestal. Then suddenly Jack Charlton comes along and he's the architect of something so special. That 1988, I mean, I've said it to you guys on roadshows before, where when we beat England that day, I literally bounced into school in North London, the proudest man. But the school I went to in Highgate was predominantly Irish anyway. It was a Catholic school, so I wasn't alone. And you just think of that man made all that happen, and everyone talks about the style and stuff like that, but I agree with Owen there. I think he was a very forward thinking. I look at the way he set that team up, how difficult Ireland were to play against, because if you think about the fact that we'd never been to a major champions before, suddenly we go to 88 and we're 7-8 minutes away from getting to the semi-final of the Euros, but for that shank shot by Koeman and then Van Keef gets that goal. Then again, you think about the quarterfinals, as Owen mentioned there, that you're playing against Italy, in Italy, and it's only Schillaci's goal from a spilled Pacchibon, Donadoni. I mean, that brilliant story. Jack says the Pope would have saved it. And it's those moments that we're not at major finals, and then suddenly we're not only at major finals, making up the numbers, we're competitive. We're the team that everyone doesn't really want to play, and we could have done something so special. So for a teenager growing up to have those moments, they were just unbelievable. They really were. And then obviously I get into the under 21 team. You're in and around the first team, your heroes. Quite often we would have played against them just as warm-ups in terms of them prepping for their main game. But to be around Jack Charlton and on the training ground, which he'd often come over to the under 21s, we'd do a bit of training with him, and he had such presence, but with such humility as well. It's difficult to explain it because we're all in awe of him, yet he was so giving. I actually was brought with the first team to travel in '95 to the Dublin game against Austria. You know, as an under 21 player, he just said, like, Breen travels with us now. He's one of us now. And imagine hearing that as a young kid initially, that they're your heroes. Now suddenly you're part of it. I was in such awe, but I'll never forget that.
They'd obviously marked you out as somebody who they really liked, and the fact that he's a centre half as well, stretching back all the way to his playing career, but he's a centre half. The centre halves that have played for Ireland from the time that he gets there, it's obviously Big Mick, but it's Paul McGrath and it's Lawrence and
Kevin Moran.
Like, these were great players.
Yeah, they're unbelievable players. And as a young centre-half who's quite slim and not particularly strong, you're looking at these men as giants, aren't you, really? And especially when you used to stand next to Jack as well. Such a big, imposing man. And when you get the nod that, like, he's saying to you, no, you've done your 21s, you come up with us now, that's incredible. But I think at the time, as a centre-half, you're thinking, well, listen, that's a great vote of confidence. But don't forget that the likes of Gary Kelly, McAteer, Babb, Mark Kennedy at that time were being pulled up as well as younger players and then put into that iconic, that pioneer team that was aging. Of course it was, and he was looking for the next batch to come along. But in terms of those memories, they'll never be able to take them away from them. They're my greatest sporting memories, without a doubt. 88 and 90. Of course, I've played in World Cups. I've had the honour and I've had the fortune to be able to do that. But as a kid growing up, my God, those memories just live in the memory. And it's not only us being there as a football team and showing the quality that Irish players have in terms of on the world stage, major finals. Look what it gave birth to in terms of our supporters and how every major finals, whoever are the organisers, whoever the host countries, are so desperate to have our supporters there because of the impact that they make. And we first saw that, of course, against England in Stuttgart in '88.
So there's no family in Ireland who hasn't been touched in some way by emigration at some point over the last 100 years.
Yeah.
And the other thing that Jack did, obviously the rules changed, and this allowed for the children of emigrants to come and join our team again. And I always, I think one of the things that helped to bind those players to Ireland was the perception from a lot of the English media. It was like, oh, look at Jack, look, his team, one of his lads had a pint of Guinness there, plastic paddies, all that kind of stuff. The fact that there were so many commentators in the Daily Mail and the Sun who were constantly chirping on about this Irish team not being very Irish actually really pissed us off, to the point where we were like, yes, they are Irish. And actually, one of the reasons why people have had to emigrate, not getting into the 800 years here, don't worry.
Yeah, no.
But the thing is that, that's a very layered, nuanced thing where it could have gone the other way. It could have been something that actually, this was a team of mercenaries and some of them didn't really understand exactly what it was like. So I'm really interested in your experience as somebody who did grow up in that tradition, who did go to an Irish school, who did know a bunch of Irish people, what it was like to be able to bounce into school that day.
Oh, yeah, well, it was everything. But I know when everyone hears my accent, and obviously I was brought up in Camden Town, but I don't have much in common with those guys who had declared for Ireland, because for me, I don't have any English relatives. I consider myself Irish. I don't see the comparison to other players, but I can understand at times where, because I've been quite vocal on that. I don't want players just coming to get an international cap. I don't want it. But I do, at the same time, do know that when they lads do come in, they really do immerse themselves in it. But I still want players to have the feeling that I had, that growing up, that it meant everything to play for Ireland, that anyone of my age, my generation, who were you supporting in '88, that time when Ray Anton scored the header? You know, that gives a good insight into whether or not you are English or Irish, regardless of whether you can qualify to play. But in terms of bearing in mind, growing up in Camden Town, a huge Irish community there anyway. I go to St Aloysius in North London, where so many Irish, run by Christian brothers and stuff like that. To bowl into school, to literally bounce in there, couldn't get into school quick enough after that result. I was so proud, because in the build-up to it, everyone's thinking, Ireland got no chance. But the reality is, and we've said this so many times, Ireland had unbelievable players. You think about Paul McGrath, Ronnie Whelan, these type of guys. These are top players. These are players who were better, in my opinion, than a lot of the England players. So we probably look back on it because it's our first major championship that it's a big shock. But when you look at the quality of the players, and I think even now, when you talk about those pioneer players now, they were very confident. They were playing against those England players week in, week out. We had so many players at Manchester United, Liverpool, Arsenal, so they could cope. So maybe it wasn't a massive shock to them, but it had huge impact in terms of Ireland and, of course, in the Irish community in and around London.
And in terms of their self-confidence about expressing the fact that they were Irish, I don't know how easy or otherwise it was in the early 90s when the Troubles were raging and the IRA bombing campaign was happening. Not necessarily something that everybody was wearing Ireland jerseys all the time, or kind of, you know,
No, of course. And obviously, Joe, you asked the scenario like in terms of history. My mum doesn't want to leave Ireland. My dad don't want to leave Ireland, but they have to because of work. Like so many people before the generation, so many people had to do that. But that connection was so strong. It was always referenced as home. Home was never London. In the school holidays, whatever, we're going home. You know, it was strange. And you're quite right, because it wouldn't have been particularly welcome, of course, when my mum and dad come over to England in the 70s. You know, we know about those famous signs where Irish are not welcome, blacks, dogs, that type of nonsense. But having said that, it was incredible when that game was won in '88, because you are going into school, you know, a strict uniform at my school, but Irish jerseys were just being worn and no one was saying nothing. I like to remember those days as opposed to the toughness that my mum and dad might have faced coming over initially.
Did you watch that game with your folks? Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember so vividly about it, because I actually played for my club team, my local team, Camden Boys or Camden Saints, on that morning, then home to watch the game. My uncle was actually over from Ireland at the time as well, so the house. And I just remember it being so hot. Obviously, we see the pictures of the game as well, and how hot it was and those summers. But it was just such excitement, because I said to you, like, in terms of 1982, Spain '82, at that age now, what am I? I'm 9. I'm really buying into now. these major finals, and Ireland are not there. Now suddenly they are there. The excitement was huge. It really was.
So you're 15. You're getting to the point where you might be thinking about football as a career. Are you good enough at that stage? Do you kind of think that you are going to make it? Like, are you beginning to dream at some point, I'm going to be part of this long, continuous story of Irish teams?
Well, that is obviously that's the dream that you have as a kid, but the reality is you kind of think you're far away from it as such. You kind of hope it will. But then, and I've said it to you guys so many times, but then I look at Paul McGrath and he's a giant of a man, and you think, well, how can you possibly be playing if someone like that's playing? He looks like a man mountain back there. Mick McCarthy as well. Kevin Moran, such physicality about him. But you obviously, you make those small steps. You get into Ireland under 21s at 18 years of age, and then you're suddenly in and around it. And then the belief comes, well, maybe I can. But even when I actually did get into the senior squad, and the likes of Ray Houghton, Andy Towns, and those guys, as they are still there, you're in such in awe of them. Obviously, Jack, when I was a 21 player, you're in and around the same hotel as them, because obviously his assistant, Morissettis, was our manager. So you're training on pitches either side of one another. And even though you're training, you're concentrating on the game, I felt it was so difficult not to look over and be drifting off a little bit to watching them train. And I don't know, I mean, I've said it to you guys so many times. It was a dream come true to play for Ireland. But Jack Charlton, he's just such an iconic figure. He really is. And you know, of course, we'll be missed. But I like to remember people when they're alive as such, and celebrate their life and
100%.
What a life he had. Iconic man. You think about Leeds, what he done. Leeds wins a World Cup. It's a very sad time, of course it is, but one of like immense pride to have been associated or to had any little impact on you. He had a little impact on my life. I'm so proud of it.
To be honest, and I know I'm labouring the point here, but I actually think that the impact that he had on your family, that's replicated in so many different ways, because it allows us all to have a conversation about the Irish emigrant population in England and how actually they're part of us, and how we need to talk about that, and how we need to try and prevent people from having to leave in the future. If people want to go, absolutely, go off and see the world, 100%.
Yeah, but don't be forced to go. Don't leave your home to go into an environment that's hostile, that's not welcoming. But you have to do it for your family. But it is amazing, because I was over in Cork before the lockdown, staying at my uncle and aunt's, and my uncle, I mentioned quite a lot, Eamon travels the world to watch Ireland play. But I was actually staying in one of the bedrooms, and it was one of my cousins who were kids at the time when I was playing. Obviously, they're grown up now. But there was still a picture there of Jack Charlton and the kids.
Yeah.
There was no picture of like Roy Keane. There was no picture of Robbie Keane. Now, you think about when I was playing for Ireland, and afterwards, my young cousins would be able to come into the players' bar afterwards and meet all their heroes. But it's the picture of Jack Charlton that's there, and Father Ted, because he was in the bar as well. They're the two. There's no Roy Keane, there's no Robbie Keane, there's no Damien Duff. And it really made me laugh. It did. And it just shows you the impact that Jack Charlton has on everyone. On everyone. He does. He's such an iconic figure.
Think about the life that he's had, where he wins a World Cup playing for his own country, and we barely mention it. It's like, you know, it's been an impressive thing to win a World Cup for whoever you are. It's quite a remarkable enough achievement. We're like, yeah, good man, but actually all this other stuff that happened. And look, maybe all those conversations were going to happen anyway, and who knows what would have happened without him. But this is the world that we've been given, and I just think it's like such a multi-layered story, as opposed to a man came and played football, and we, you know, played long ball and put the other team under opposition, and nobody knew what to do with it, and we got to a World Cup quarter-final, and that's all that's to the story. It's a beautifully woven tapestry of thousands and thousands, and actually millions of lives for the last 30 years that have kind of rallied behind football in a way too, that like football as a culture in Ireland didn't have mass public support in the way that it did afterwards. And I know there's a little bit of like, there's certainly a generation from the League of Ireland who think that the League of Ireland got left behind in that, and we probably need to have that conversation now as well, like to just broaden the church of Irish football back to where it was the single most important national team, and it still is, Gary. That's the thing. That's why, like, I think what that team from '88 all the way through to '94 and '95 had the power to do was to make us all go, this is cool, we should get behind this team. Yeah, I mean, when you think about our national championship with the football, the hurling, and the supporters, the day out, they're amazing. You try to kind of say that, obviously as a kid,
I'd be coming over, going to watch the great 80s Kerry team. And I'd be coming back to London saying to my mates who are not Irish, you need to somehow come over and watch that. And they just didn't know about it, did they, as such, in terms of how much passion it was supporting the counties or whatever. And then suddenly, in 88, our Irish supporters are on the main stage as such, and the whole world gets to see it again. And likewise, I said this at a time when we started playing our games at Croke Park while the stadium was being built, that I suddenly now I could say to everyone who I grew up with, my mates in England, like, look at our stadiums. And they're like, what stadium's that? It's Croke Park, where we play the Gaelic games and stuff like that, and being so proud of it. But for the world to see our supporters, be it in 88 and 90, and of course then in 94, when you hear that in that giant stadium against Italy that there's Irish supporters everywhere, it was amazing. And then to get into the team and then be around the likes of Mick Byrne, and who's telling stories about Jack, and as an Ireland supporter growing up, I was in my absolute element. I really was. You know, when people say it's about a dream come true, for me, it really was. I know it sounds romantic, sounds a bit like soppy as such, but it really was a dream come true to suddenly be, yeah, of course, playing and wearing the green shirt, but to be amongst it, to be in the inner circle, as it was, and then, of course, go out and then play in front of those travelling supporters who are, of course, in Dublin, but also all around the world. It was such a I look back with such pride.
Do you feel Ireland as a nation was taken more seriously abroad as a result of what these Jack Charlton teams achieved?
Footballing terms, or just
footballing and as a nation?
Yeah,
I guess
and culturally, yeah. I think so. But I think, Owen, because so many, and as Jer said there, so many of our Irishmen and women had to leave their homes and have travelled the world. I know it's the Americas, Australia, England, whatever, but they seem to have had to kind of like emigrate all over the world. So suddenly there, when we're on the world stage, you can imagine, listen, of course, the whole of Ireland is gripped by what's happened in 88 and 90, and of course, the massive Irish community in England. But can you imagine in the Americas? Of course, we saw that in Giant Stadium, didn't we, in terms of the fact that the Italians were completely outnumbered when they have such a massive population in and around America. But I do believe, I think suddenly you're on the world stage. I think, don't we all, we learn about, it's a terrible thing to say, but I think even now we're learning about countries by when we're seeing their football team, aren't we? And we go, oh, where about exactly is that? It's just human nature.
Yeah, it is hard to disassociate the two things. And that's kind of why I asked the question. The other question I have, Gary, is like the question of legacy from this Jack Charlton team. And I guess you'd be perfectly placed to have played in the only World Cup team that wasn't managed by Jack Charlton. Was there a legacy? Was there a sort of impact from what had happened in the 90s on your achievements in the early 2000s in terms of qualifying, in terms of that belief in Irish football?
Yeah, of course there's a legacy, but what more than anything is there's a huge responsibility, because you've got to perform. You know, it's as simple as that. It's all well and good getting there. And that's why when I think about the guys who got to the Euros in 2012 and it just like didn't lay a glove on anyone, lost all 3 games, that's what I felt so sorry for those guys, because they grew up dreaming of playing for Ireland. And the dream is always that you have an iconic moment. There's a big game. There's something to look back on. They never had any of that. But of course, there's huge responsibilities. And even when people talk about Jack Charlton's style of play, there was huge responsibilities within that. It's all well and good saying it's route one or such like that, but it was so organised, so well drilled that you had to execute it well. We felt that even with the under-21s, we felt at times when we trained with them that if you didn't play the ball in the right area, I remember vividly him training with us, the under-21s, doing a shooting session at the end. If you hit the ball over the bar, he was absolutely seething, saying, what chance have you got? You've got to hit the target, even if the goalkeeper saves it. It keeps it alive. We've got another chance again. And that famous saying of keep him under pressure, his whole game plan was built around that. And it must have been so stifling to play against those players who were technically very good players. We know that. But imagine really with that high energy, that relentlessness of their play. No wonder we were able to impact at major finals, because it was so difficult to play against.
Was there any pressure in coming after that team?
Massive pressure. Of course there is. But obviously, and Jack said it, I mean, I was reading the quotes over the weekend, and he actually said to that team, that lost against Holland in the playoffs. I remember there's a quote attributed to him saying, listen, we're struggling. You can't run as quick as you or as hard as you used to before. So he knew he had an aging team. And I think he probably intimated that he would like to bring the next generation through. But I don't think that was ever going to happen in terms of his age as such. But there is pressure. Of course there is, in terms of replacing those players, because how can you replace? I mean, as I said to you, I struggled in training. In games, it was fine because the whistle would go, but even in training, you're turning around and shouting to Paul McGrath, give me the ball, or Ray, give me the... I found it so difficult at first. I really did. I struggled in training. Games were easy because you get used to it. The whistle blows and you're in your own environment again. But I always wondered about, as a senior player in the Ireland squad, when the younger ones were coming through, maybe on the back of 2002 World Cup, a lot of those players towards the end of my career would have been young boys watching those games. But I don't ever remember them ever being in total awe of us. Maybe they were with Robbie in terms of his goal, but I don't think they ever were in a way that I certainly was. The lads of my age were when we suddenly were playing with the pioneers of 88, 90 and 94. I know a lot of them had retired, but there was still a lot of them around. I don't know, it's just weird because you just put them on a pedestal. I think if we'd have won that penalty shootout against Spain, possibly could have got to the semi-final, could have probably got to the World Cup final with a bit of luck. But the reality is that those pioneers would still be the ones that we put on a pedestal more than anyone else.
You had a pretty good team too. You did all right, Gary. Listen, it's been great. And it's just been a wide-ranging conversation. I think they need to pay proper testimony to Jack Charlton. But thanks a million for joining us this morning.
That was a pleasure. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Great stuff there from Gary Breen with us this morning. 087 9180 180 is the number if you want to get in touch by WhatsApp. You can just text us there, or send us a video, send us some audio, whatever you want. And you can also use the hashtag OTB AM. Still plenty more to come here. We're going to be bringing Monday Sports Pages. We'll be back with our Gillette pressure rankings. First though, here's John Giles speaking to OTB at the weekend about his memories of his friend and teammate, Jack Charlton.
Do you remember when you first met him, John?
I remember Jack when I first met him. I went to Leeds in 1963. I was 22. Jack was, I think, 27, 28. And I actually had a strip next to him in the dressing room. So I met him I'd met him before that because he's a brother of Bobby, the famous Bobby, as we know. Yeah. And he used to come to Manchester now and again to see Bobby. And I met him there in Manchester, but I didn't get to know him very well. Obviously got to know him very well when I went to Leeds at that time.
And you effectively took on the establishment with Leeds, John. You won the league in 1969. You won the FA Cup in 1972. I say he was a great man to have behind you because he was a great centre-half. He was, he had a strange career, Jack, at Leeds. Before, Leeds mostly were a second division team, and they were in the first division now and again. And they weren't doing very well when Dunleavy took over. And Jack hadn't been the best trainer in the world. He didn't look after himself as well as he might have done. And I think Dunleavy gave him a warning that if he didn't book up, he'd be out. And he became then the best centre-half, in my opinion, in what was then what's now the Premier League for at least 5 seasons. And that included playing in the World Cup, winning the World Cup with England in 1966. He was a top-class centre-half. What was he like as a teammate?
I didn't get on very well with him as a teammate. We had different ideas about the game. Jack was a big centre-half, and he saw the game through the big centre-half's eyes. So if Bremner and myself were going deep for the ball, he'd say, get up the pitch. I can do what you can do. And then he'd kick it into the crowd. He believed that, in other words, if he got the ball on the edge of the box, as a big centre-half, there's a good chance he'd lose it. And he saw the game through that way. Like he wouldn't give any credit to Billy Bremner and myself as little fellas who could beat somebody and wouldn't lose a ball at the edge of the box. So we didn't have the same philosophy on the game in a big way, but we respected each other. He was the best centre half, as I said, for at least 5 or 6 years in the first division, and off the pitch we got on very, very well.
For me, it was a self-imposed pressure.
Was I under pressure? No.
Yeah, they're under pressure. Everyone's under pressure.
OTB AM's pressure rankings with Gillette.
And the big pressure.
Is everybody under pressure? That was Roy Keane in the middle of that. But obviously we started with Jack Charlton, and we had this planned that we would be starting our brand new Gillette pressure rankings this weekend, where we're going to talk about the managers, the teams, the incidents, the sports bodies, the governing bodies, the fans, the columnists, the broadcasters, whoever is under the most pressure. And, you know, we could just have Jose Mourinho as a staple every week if we wanted to at this point. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer would have been a mainstay of this if we were doing it back last November and before football went into recess. But instead, we've decided to do a reeling in the years style Jack Charlton special today on. It just had to be.
You couldn't go anywhere else. What a week to be kicking this off, really. And what greater words could you associate with that Ireland team and with Jack Charlton than pressure, and the pressure bestowed upon everybody who dared try and dash the hopes of our nation.
Yeah, so in reverse order, number 3, we have Eamon Dunphy under a bit of pressure from Jack Charlton. Number 2, Arrigo Sacchi. And number 1, England and the FA. They were the one. We're going to start with Dunphy, though. There's a great piece from Paul Rouse today where he's talking about the cultural impact that the football team had, and he quotes Nuala Ó Foileán, the writer. So Nuala Ó Foileán wrote an amazing memoir called Are You Somebody, which kind of captured the time that she grew up in. She was in a relationship with Niall McCafferty, and I think this might also have been before homosexuality was decriminalised. And so Nuala Ó Foileán was a columnist in the Irish Times, and not a huge sports fan, although Niall McCafferty did end up covering the World Cup. I'm pretty sure for the Sunday Independent at the time. And you can imagine the type of life that Nuala Ó Foileán and Niall McCafferty had lived, where they were constantly butting up against the worst excesses of the state, where they weren't free to be themselves, where the rules prevented them from actualising their very existence. And yet at the same time, they were trying to lead this artistic lifestyle, trying to help Ireland find its way out of the black pall of despair that had fallen over the country because Eamon de Valera had been in charge, essentially, to bring us right back to the bit that we had earlier on. She said that the World Cup in 1990 had been the most liberating she had ever experienced in Ireland. She expressed dismay at the notion that after the tournament, Irish people might retreat to being our limited selves. And I think that's exactly why the criticism of the football team that Dunphy led, and that, you know, I'd say Giles agreed with largely as well, struck a discordant note at the time for so many people, because the hope was that we could become a bigger country, a better country, if we all just kind of came together and remembered that, like, we have cousins living in Frankfurt who were driving to the game and sending us the hats afterwards, and like their experience, we could actually meet up and share and talk about these things in a way. Like phone calls are really expensive. You'd put like loads of money in, and phoning Germany was really, really expensive. But now here, all of a sudden, people were meeting and traveling together for the first time. There were no cheap flights. It was 300 quid to fly anywhere. Every time you wanted to fly anywhere, it was like 300 quid. This is a completely different world. And all of a sudden, the football team has this group of fans who are meeting up and going to the away games and coming back with these stories about what it's like not to be stuck in monochrome, black and white Ireland. And I think that part of the reason why criticising the football team became something that you weren't allowed to do was because it represented something more than the football team. I don't know if this makes sense to you, Owen.
I understand what you're trying to say. I think that part of the brave new Ireland that we were entering into, though, was a place that encouraged debate, that had people who would be dissenting voices against the thing that you thought you loved. There was room for intellectualism. There was room to tell you that what you thought was possibly wrong, things that you believed all your life. There was a possibility that perhaps you were wrong about those things. It probably felt like a lifetime that people had felt a religious cause that was the Ireland football team under Jack Charlton. It was such a wave, especially come Italia 90. It had felt that saying something bad, I'd imagine, about that team was blasphemy in the country. And that is some amount of pressure to be on Eamon Dunphy at this point. And like, it's fantastic that the debate existed. It is fantastic that it was allowed to happen. And to be honest with you, in hindsight, it's kind of impressive how stubborn Jack Charlton was in the face of all of this, how personally he took that criticism, how proud he was in this team. And it's interesting because we've had so many of these debates in recent years, really, about how pragmatic Ireland have been in their approach. I really think the recent pragmatism has been based on defeatism in Ireland, whereas Jack Charlton's pragmatism was not at all.
No, it's the opposite.
It was based on the fact that if we were to play this way, we had a better chance of winning a game.
He was dreaming of being successful as opposed to trying not to lose. That was the point. This wasn't to try not to lose. This was to try and go and compete. It's the exact opposite of the stuff that we fall into. Just on the point about Dunphy, though, like you need people like Dunphy in the middle of that going, hang on a second here, hang on a second here. You absolutely, there are roles for people, and we need more of them now than we probably did we didn't. We were crying out for it back then as well. And here's the point. Could Liam Brady have improved the team? Probably. Could David O'Leary have improved the team? Probably. Like, the whole point is here that they might both have been right. Like, it's not a caricature. That team was not just a caricature the way that Dunphy explained it. But he had a point. And in the middle of the bluster and the bravado, there was certainly, Liam Brady would have improved the team in '88, even though, obviously he was suspended, but he could have come back in. And in '90, Ronnie Whelan should have been fast-tracked back into the side. Look, these are the things that, you're going to have debates about 30 years later, and that's fine. But that whole relationship was fairly amazing. Not the finest moment trying to kick him out of the press conference, but, amazing archive footage all the same.
And it was also kind of mutually beneficial, I would have thought. Like, it was a great experience for everybody involved in that. I mean, like, under pressure, diamonds are born, and that RTE panel was a bit of a diamond at the time as well. The profile of all those pundits, including Dunphy, skyrocketed. So nobody was a loser, really, in all of that.
Number 2 is Arrigo Sacchi. Just to put some context on Arrigo Sacchi, he is in charge of the great Milan side, who wins back-to-back Champions Leagues and has Van Basten, Hullet and Rijkaard, has Baresi, has Maldini, has Donadoni. It's not a bad team. It's not a bad team. And it feels like it's revolutionised European football. And he's in charge in 87, 88, 89. That's that period of time where he's in charge. And he's up against Diego Maradona's Napoli. And we're watching. These games are being beamed into our houses every Monday night for an hour. It's like a little splash of sunshine again into it's like, wow, look at this. This is what the rest of the world looks like. And it's amazing. The pitches seem to have grass on them the whole season through. Maybe that's a trick of my mind, but that's certainly what my recollection of it is. They seem to have undersoil heating long before. Anyway, but it is Maradona playing week in, week out against these guys, and their shirts are class. Even their change trip is amazing. And 4 years later, he's in charge of the Italian team going to the World Cup. And we beat them. Like, he's definitely the best manager of his generation at that time. Everybody thinks of him as the greatest manager in world football. And Ray Houghton shouldn't really be in the team because he's not playing very well. Like, he just squeaks into the team. It's kind of this weird sort of almost nostalgia that Jack has. Come on. And then out of nothing. This weird, beautiful elliptical goal that makes us beat the Italians. It's like, so Arrigo Sacchi in the history pressure ranking. Can you imagine what that Italian dressing room was like afterwards? They're looking. He's got Baggio. He's got Baresi. Did Baresi get injured in that match, or is it the next game he gets injured? I think he might even got injured in that one. And you're like, what am I doing? Look at this. Now they rescue the scenario and go all the way through to a penalty shootout, but at the same time, Big Jack's ability to put Arrigo Sacchi under pressure, number 2 in our pressure rankings.
And like, this is Sacchi, as you mentioned, in his 40s. Like, this is not a journeyman manager who has achieved everything he could possibly achieve at club and then finally has his retirement swan song with the national team. This is Arrigo Sacchi going to win the World Cup. So that just adds the cherry on the cake, really.
Yeah, so like you're thinking about, say, if Jose Mourinho had managed Portugal in 2014, around that kind of period, because that was just 4 years after his last Champions League victory. You're like, this is the level of celebrity and fame that Arrigo Sacchi had. I'm just trying to look at the exact years that he was the manager of Milan. So he didn't stop being the manager of Milan until 1991. So this is just 3 years after he leaves Milan. Okay, who's number 1, Owen?
Number 1 is England, the FA. Call it what you want. They are the entity under which Jack Charlton has put the most pressure. It's a no-brainer, Joe, really, because like through the secret weapon of Ray Houghton, it was done on the pitch, but also off the pitch. Not giving a reply to Jack Charlton when he applies for your management job just smacks of disrespect. It was something that Jack Charlton probably never forgot, probably as a man who has a certain amount of traditional values. The lack of the courtesy of a reply probably stuck in the craw for quite some time, and it's probably something he never truly forgot about, really. Not getting that England gig is something that I saw it referred to yesterday as Charlton being too good for the England job at that time. That if we look at our administration in this country and how things have failed in recent time as well, the FA not appointing Jack Charlton, the FA not entertaining Jack Charlton, never mind appointing, not even entertaining the prospect of Jack Charlton, is one hell of a failing on their part. So there's countless things you can go through here, but they are the big thing that was slammed to the ground under the pressure of Big Jack through his tenure. It's amazing that Bobby Robson managed to keep the gig all the way through to 1990, because obviously that England team in '88, like the World Cup in '86, was fresh in people's minds by the time the '88 thing happens, and in '86 they were robbed by Diego Maradona, right? Like they really were. Maradona was at his absolute best and still had to cheat to knock them out. Like, that's the team that wins the World Cup. Had to cheat to beat this England team. And they're coming into it going, oh, we're absolutely amazing. Everybody's even better now than they were 2 years ago. Like, Lineker is a world star. Barnes is absolutely sensational. And we beat them. Not bad. Yeah, it isn't. It's not at all. It's sensational. Like, the only thing that you would have to say in England's favour throughout that entire period is Lineker, and how Jack Charlton always voiced the concern that if they had somebody with the pace of Gary Lineker, they might have gone on to win the World Cup. But other than that, we had him in our back pocket. That's it for this week's Gillette Pressure Rankings here on OTB AM. It's time for the sports pages.
OTB AM.
Going to start with otbsports.com. These are the lead stories on the OTB Sports app and on our website. Jack Charlton and Paul McGrath managing God. A brilliant relationship that the two men have, and very few people, I think, might have been able to understand what Paul McGrath was going through and to make it okay. Win for Brian and you're made for life. Lose and he'll hold it against you. It's David Geraghty, the Kilkenny goalkeeper. We'll talk about that in a moment. Jack Charlton's the FAI have opened a book of condolences, and Brian Kerr's thoughts, Euro 88 and Jack Charlton made it acceptable to play soccer in Ireland. I think it's a point that John Giles reached for straight away as well, about the popularisation of football at a mass level, and it going from being something, bear in mind the remnants of the ban were still there and all that kind of stuff. Dunphy talked about being called a Shoneen man for being a football man, and how it was kind of, it wasn't quite respected the way it needed to be. I mean, I think Opel got the sponsorship deal for basically a song, and all of a sudden it was like, no, this is the team that represents the country nationally, internationally. This is the team. There's no other team that can actually lay claim to being Ireland's team beyond the football team, and Charlton's role and all that is hugely important.
The Irish Independent this morning leads with a photograph of Jack Charlton. Fairly simple headline, just his name and the years between which he lived. The people loved him, and they loved him maybe above all because he changed our self-image. Now, there's another story here in the back of the Irish Independent on the GAA front. Second club forced to suspend activity after player tests positive. This is Colm Keys and Conor McKeown writing that a North Cork club, Glanworth, have issued a statement confirming the outcome of a positive test, specifying that it is a player. Over the weekend, North County Dublin club Man O' War confirmed that one of their members had also tested positive, and Cork GAA issued their own statement in the positive case in Glanworth, adding that the Competitions Control Committee will meet in due course following consultation with Croke Park to consider the implications, if any, for the county competition. So that is the second GAA club making it known publicly that somebody involved has tested positive for COVID-19. Yeah, and the games are imminent now. That's the other issue here. So a lot of championships are going to be derailed, it seems, by various players testing positive. Hopefully not too many. Brilliant front page. Jack Charlton in silhouette from the Irish Examiner this morning. Jack Charlton
the man behind our Seasons in the Sun. Great detail from Liam Mackey, who was working for the Irish Press at the time, and was asked to write a 3-part story about Jack's life. Unbelievable detail about Jack as a 15-year-old, being trained in as a worker in the mines, and then after the week's training going into the office and saying, I'm not doing this job, I am not doing this job, no thanks. And the guy is like, you can't leave, we've just spent loads of money training you for the week. He says, I can leave, I am leaving. And your man behind the desk goes, well, you'll never work in a mine again. And Jack goes, great. It was just the horror of working in the mine. And look, it never left him, you know. It was definitely, he was a supporter of the workers. And look, he does also mention Brady, Liam Toohey and David O'Leary as well. So it's not an uncomplicated legacy, but plenty of time to get into that over the next while.
The London Times this morning leads with a photo from England against the West Indies in the cricket, the one that got away. West Indies winning by 4 wickets in their first test. FAI restart call for grassroots, meanwhile, writes Matt Lawton. The FAA hoping that grassroots football will return by this weekend. And then finally, boy held over Zaha racism. A 12-year-old boy arrested over a series of racially abusive messages sent to Crystal Palace's Wilfred Zaha. These were images uploaded by Zaha to Twitter. The boy got in touch with him on Instagram, I think, with Palace and Villa releasing statements condemning the perpetrator and vowing to issue a lifetime ban.
The front of the Irish Times, our Jack, just a picture of Jack in 88, I think, at Dublin Airport, is it? Yeah, June 88, a picture of him smiling, absolutely delighted. That's the first of the homecomings, 3 homecomings, when you think about it. Like, 3 brilliant homecomings. So that's the Irish Times for you this morning, their front page.
The Star this morning. While I dig this out for you, the Star just...
Cowardly and vile is the headline on the UK Star. 12-year-old held over Zaha racelers. The Irish Star here has a picture of Big Jack, and they've got writing inside from Dunphy, Dolan, Roddy and Loughnane, 16-page tribute pull-out. And then they also have a picture of Barry Geraghty on the back there, obviously. Lots and lots of great Barry Geraghty stuff in the papers today as well, by the way, and worth spending some time on that, because that is one of the great Irish sports careers, over 2 decades at the very top, and going out after a sensational, absolutely sensational Cheltenham as well, which, you know, again, is a career that needs to be paid tribute to, and we'll do that properly over the next while. Next, we have the Mirror for you. And the Mirror, again, it's that same, so that's the Daily Mirror in the UK there. The Irish Mirror here, Jack Charlton, 1935 to 2020. You can't forget the impact of what it meant to see the Ireland team play on the biggest stage. He transformed the hopes and dreams of us all. To Chris Hughton, they've got talking about that. I haven't seen Chris Hughton talking anywhere else about that. So that's in the Mirror this morning.
The Irish Sun this morning leads with the Wilfred Zaha story as well. Racist, aged 12. Zaha reports online abuse. Police swoop to arrest boy. Mourinho, meanwhile, says, I want a Europa hat-trick. This is Jose Mourinho eyeing up his Europa League hat-trick after Spurs won the North London showdown. It's all of a sudden become quite important for him to qualify for this, basically because Arsenal look like they won't qualify for it. That being said, there's a good chance neither of them will qualify for the Europa League in one of the more irrelevant phases in the North London rivalry. Geraghty locked in, meanwhile. Barry Geraghty admits the coronavirus lockdown made up his mind to end his 24-year riding career, and Seamus slams him. Seamus Coleman blasted his Everton teammates after their limp defeat to Wolves yesterday.
The Sun's front cover is St. Jack, and it's a picture of Jack and his granddaughter at his granddaughter's wedding. She put that up on Twitter over the weekend. It's a lovely photograph of him, you know, in an unguarded family moment, absolutely thrilled and happy, and calls for a statue to be built in memory of national treasure. It's kind of funny that we don't have a statue of Jack Charlton. Where would it go?
Lansdowne Road.
Yeah? I mean, is there somewhere better?
Beside one of his favourite rivers in Mayo?
Maybe. I mean, yeah, maybe. And it could become a place of pilgrimage. The Mail for you. Travel club Horan on the road with training plans. Mayo manager James Horan has found a way to stay in contact with his players by taking club team training sessions. So it's a good idea. Leeds grab late win for Big Jack, and that's Pablo Hernandez celebrating his late winner as they paid tribute to him. And then obviously they've got a pull-out as well of memories of Big Jack. That is the mail for you this morning.
The Guardian then lead with a photo of the victorious West Indies team sealing thrilling Test victory by 4 wickets over England yesterday. Lewis Hamilton then says we have to push for equality. He gives his Black Power salute and makes a lifelong vow. And also the story there of police arresting a 12-year-old boy after he sent racist messages to Wilfred Zaha.
So that was the Guardian. The Telegraph is there, and it's obviously the cricket on the back page of the Telegraph this morning, because apparently the game was good this weekend. I didn't have to see it. And then they also have the Zaha story there as well. 12-year-old arrested over Zaha abuse.
Only one story in town on the front of the Racing Post. I fulfilled all my dreams. Geraghty says, time is right to go.
On the back page of the Herald, Ole, I have full faith in David De Gea. United boss salutes De Gea's strong mentality. Says he never dreamed of dropping him. And Jack made kids like me dream is the story. That's Richard Dunn on the passing of a legend. So Dublin club ceases all activity after positive test. That's a Man of War story as well. So that is you up to speed, I think, on all the papers. Is there one left, the Irish News for you?
Do we have an Irish News this morning?
I think we do. And if we don't, we can just move on to what's on the OTB Sports app for you here. It's 10 minutes past 9. If you want to get involved, 0879 180 180 is the number. So the latest stories on the OTB Sports app for you, your home feed. You get to pick which sports show up there. You can personalise it. You can check out our latest videos that we upload, and then all of our podcasts are nice and easy for you to get there. It's a one-touch button to get onto OTB Sports Radio, which a lot of you are doing. Turns out the easiest way to get a full-time sports radio station is just to get this app. Search OTB Sports in the App Store, click the radio button, click play, and away you go. Top quality content. I went to bed last night listening to the Kildare Mount Rushmore, thinking, ooh, maybe we made some mistakes. Loads of good stuff on the OTB Sports app for you there as well. So what are we at? 11 minutes past 9 this morning. I'm going to be chatting with Phil Egan, Shane Hannon and Hector Ó about the retirement of Barry Geraghty over the next hour. But the countdown is on for the BMW run and ride for Pieta, as in it's on this Friday. We're back talking to running coach Emmet Dunleavy next this morning here on OTB AM.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
They spoke about your arm not being down beside your side. I mean, this is not Irish dancing.
OTB Sports Radio.
Basketball would have been my main game.
The brand new sports radio station from Off the Ball.
That's my point. Don't play for us if you're a proud Englishman.
Live 24/7 on the OTB Sports app.
Alexa.
You have a whole new world of possibilities.
Now available on otbsports.com.
This is OTB Sports Radio.
Missing this?
I remember Ollie texted me Solskjaer. One or two people would get hold of my number, unfortunately, and he would text me.
Then get this, the all-new OTB Sports app. Off the Ball, Ireland's premier sports channel, now has a new home, featuring the biggest names in Irish and world sports. Podcasts, interviews, news, commentary, analysis, plus almost 20 years of sporting archives. All free and ready when you are, at home or on the go. The new OTB Sports app. Download it now from the App Store and Google Play.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
You know the way you sign up for something and it's months and months away and you're like, that'll be grand, everything's going to be fine. Well, you know, the time is now, because this Friday, on the 17th of July, a group of us from Team OTB will be kicking off the run and ride for Pieta with a sprint duathlon. It's going to be broadcast live here on OTB AM, or as much of it as we possibly can, and it's all with thanks to BMW and Triathlon Ireland. Bell Park Triathlon running coach Emmet Dunleavy is with us. He's been working with Team OTB as a running coach slash guru slash psychologist over the last 6 weeks. Emmet, good morning to you. How you doing?
Good morning, lads. How are we?
Should we just stop? Is the last week just about tapering now? Our work is done. Or am I desperately trying to put some miles into the legs for Friday? What am I supposed to do to try and rescue the situation?
No, your first statement there hit the nail on the head. At this stage, the work is done. The only thing you can do in the last week before a race is mess it up. You're not going to gain any more fitness at this stage. Once you get into the last 7 to 10 days, the work is done. You need to keep ticking over. A little bit of, I'd say one run and one bike early this week would be enough to just keep the body primed and ready to go on Friday morning, but don't try and push anything. Keep the big effort this week for Friday itself.
When you say one run and one bike, is it just short? Like, is it like 2 kilometres, 5 kilometres? What should they be?
Yeah, so I mean, your event at the weekend is 5k run, 20k bike and 2.5k run. So I would say for your run this week, you're probably talking 3 or 4K, you could probably do, maybe 1 or 2 pickups within that run of around 30 to 45 seconds, again, just to keep the body primed and ready to go on Friday morning. And likewise, if you're going out for a bike, I would say it would be 10, maybe 15K, but easy. And keep those early in the week that if your event is on Friday morning, you want to be certainly taking Thursday off and maybe even Wednesday off as well to get ready.
What do you actually eat on the day of an event, and when do you eat? Because this is something that we said that we'd become experts on this over the course of the 5 or 6 weeks, but it turns out life gets in the way when you're training for stuff like this, and I'm not entirely sure what the right thing to do on the day of an event is when it comes to actually getting some nutrition in that's not going to make you feel, oh, shouldn't have done that.
Yeah. The first thing I'll say is the nutrition on race day is something that for a lot of athletes they kind of put an awful lot of emphasis on, and they think that this is going to be a magic bullet or a game changer. It's unlikely to be unless you get it drastically wrong. So, I mean, if you stick to what you normally do on the days that you're training, you're not going to go too far wrong. Given that you guys are starting, I think it's around 8 o'clock on Friday morning, would that be right?
Yeah, a little bit early.
Yeah. So, I mean, to run you through what a pre-morning ritual might be for an 8 o'clock start, it would be a case of getting up nice and early, sort of 5:30, that your body is awake and that you have plenty of time to wake up and digest your breakfast beforehand. I mean, for some people, 5 o'clock would be a difficult start time, but for you, you're well up. You're well used to getting up early in the mornings anyway, so that shouldn't be an issue. I would normally suggest getting up, going for an easy 5 or 10 minute walk, or some of the elites what you would find would do an easy shakeout jog the morning of an event. They do a 5 or 10 minute jog. I wouldn't advise that. And come back, have a shower, and then have your breakfast, a light breakfast, and eat what you would normally eat. So for some people, that might be having, your porridge or your oats. For others, it might just be a slice or two of toast. Whatever you normally eat. The other thing that I would usually advise people to do is have some coffee. And again, that should be, I suppose, something that you're used to. If you've never drank coffee before a race before, don't go touching it on Friday morning. It is performance-enhancing benefits, and it helps on the endurance side of things, but it also has some, nasty consequences if you haven't been somebody who drinks coffee beforehand. So that would be a good thing to add in. Try and have your breakfast done and dusted by 6 o'clock, and then you've got 2 hours to digest it, relax, and get ready for the race itself.
And in terms of pace, right, the one thing, so I've never done this before. We did last year the relay, so everybody did a little bit, and the thing that was very noticeable was as soon as we started our section of the relay, you went at it hell for leather and were completely wrecked 15 seconds later. It was like, oh my God, I can't believe, what did I do? Because the adrenaline just kicks in. Now, that was in the midst of huge crowds of people and people cheering you on. It was really hard not to get carried away by the fact that you're in the middle of this thing, which is genuinely a race for some people. How do we stop that from happening?
Yeah, avoiding taking off too quick is definitely one of the main pieces of advice I'd give you. I suppose good rule of thumb is in the early stages, and when I'm talking early stages, I mean over the first 1 to 2 minutes of both the run and the cycle, I would suggest if it feels right in terms of pace, it's probably too quick. Because our perception of what we can sustain for long periods of time tends to be a little bit distorted by the fact that you're excited, adrenaline is flowing, and obviously for you guys there's a bit of competition between everybody as well. So keep that in mind, is that if you feel that the pace is right in the early stages, it's probably too quick, drop it back a gear and drop the intensity a little bit. In any endurance event, what you would like to see an athlete do is do negative splits, which means that they're doing the second half of the event quicker than the first half. And in order to do that, you need to pace yourselves pretty sensibly in those early, I suppose for you guys, for the early run, for that first 5K, and for the first maybe 5 to 10K of the bike, that you're keeping it conservative. And then you're allowing yourself to pick it up in the second half of the event. And if you can't pick it up, then you're already going quick enough anyway. But you'd be surprised when you do start out that little bit slower, try and work your way through the pace in the middle part and push hard towards the end. It's definitely the optimum way to approach it, rather than going hell for leather for that first 15 seconds. You've
seen the Strava stats and figures over the last while. Who's going to win? Emmet, what's the order going to be? It's
what I'm going to do is give yourselves. I'm going to go through your Stravas again today and give you a little bit of guidance in terms of pace. There's 2 front runners at the moment. Shane and Tommy are out in front. So if you were getting Paddy Power on board for this, I think they will be the bookies' favourites as it stands.
And more importantly, who's going to finish last?
That remains to be seen. I'm not going to make any such judgments.
Well, if you even want to do it in the privacy of our WhatsApp group, feel free, because we will 100% leak that to the general public.
Excellent.
Emmet, it's been great. To be honest, I kind of see the benefits of the regular little bits of advice that you've been giving us, because early on, running especially, it's very easy to lose faith, and it's very easy to kind of lose the sense of progress. But like, I've never actually run 5k in my life until 2 days ago for the first time ever, and it was like, actually, I can do this, but I did that by virtue of the fact that I was able to build it up over 5 or 6 weeks.
It's a fantastic achievement for people who've never run before, and hopefully there's a lot of people who've been following this over the last couple of weeks. And I think during the lockdown period, an awful lot of people took up running, took up cycling. And as you say yourself, I mean, there's a great sense of achievement regardless of how fast or slow you're going. And with any of these, either running or cycling, it's really about improving yourself, because no matter what level you're at, there are always people, a little bit faster than you and a little bit slower than you, and it's really just self-improvement and enjoying is the main part of it.
100%. It's great having you with us. Thanks a million for being part of our journey.
Best of luck on Friday, guys.
Thanks a million. It's Emmet Dunleavy there, who is a triathlon coach himself. That's all part of the BMW Run and Ride for Pieta. So, and you managed not to do it. It's live this Friday morning on the 17th of July here on OTB AM. So I'm going to go and do that, and then I'm going to come in and do the evening show, and you're going to be sitting here, essentially scratching your ass.
That is 100% the plan. How are you feeling about it?
I look forward to the week of rest this week, somehow making it happy and easy that it's going to happen and finish.
What is it again? The exact breakdown of the race?
5k, 20k, 2.5k. I think, it might even be, is it 7? I'm not sure. It's certainly...
How have you found getting on and off the bike and the jelly legs?
Not great. No, I'm not going to lie. I haven't done it that much, but did it yesterday and was okay for like 1.8k after a 30k cycle. So there's a real chance somebody doesn't make it all the way to the finish line. That we're going to be one of those, in the old westerns when somebody would get shot with 4 arrows and they'd be like, oh, heroically, go on without me, leave me behind. And you're like, yeah, okay, we're leaving you behind. There's a good chance that I'm going to be one of those people who's like, oh, go on without me. And I'll be like, yeah, okay, Grant, we'll see you on the other side. So,
I don't think so. I think if you've done a 1.8k run after a 30k cycle, that's only 700 more metres with a 33% reduction on that cycle time. You're going to be fine.
The 5k run before that.
That is true, I guess.
That's the killer. It's the running is the hardest part, especially when you're now big boned and hardy handsome, I think is the phrase I'm looking for. When you're big boned like me, carrying around all that stuff. Right, 21 minutes past 9 here. Graeme Souness joined Joe on yesterday's OTB and spoke to us about his own relationship with Jack Charlton.
His great love was shooting and fishing. I mean, and I'm not sure if football was just something to take his mind off fishing and shooting. It wasn't the other way around. It definitely wasn't the other way around where, the hunting and the fishing were taking his mind off football. I think it was the other way around. And I'm thinking of stories as we're talking. God forbid you ever got in a car with him, because he would have dead animals that had been there for a few days in his car. Honestly, it stunk. She'd walk you to the training ground. And say, oh no, Jack, I think I'd rather walk there. And it was about 3 miles away, Hutton Road. I mean, because you got in the car, there was feathers, there was dead fish, there was dead pheasants and geese. It was, no. You only have a shower after being in the car 2 or 3 minutes.
That's an image.
It was great times. I mean, we were very successful. Yeah. I think the first year in the Premier League First Division, that 1 year I think we finished 5th or 6th.
Right.
He got us at that. We were a decent team.
Yeah, they were a decent team. Some more of those team hopefully we're going to hear from in the coming days. Shane Hannon is with us. Shane, good morning to you. How are you?
Not too bad, lads. Keeping well. Still have the hat on, don't worry.
Look, I think you can wear it for the whole week here. And honestly, I think that, the hipsters are going to love it when they see it eventually. What have you got for us?
Yeah, we'll kick off, I guess, with the Premier League, lads. Big night tonight because Manchester United can move into 3rd place in the Premier League standings if they can beat Southampton at Old Trafford. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's side unbeaten, of course, in their last 17 games, and a win will see them climb above both Leicester and Chelsea in the race for that Champions League qualification. Although fatigue may be setting in, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer says he sees no reason to change the team.
We got players here that chomping at the bit, they want to play, but you got players who are in the rhythm and keep on playing well, and there's loads of decisions to be made, but they make it easier by playing well and performing well and looking after themselves.
Yeah, kick-off at Old Trafford in that match this evening is at 8 o'clock. Leicester's chances of finishing in the top four suffered a blow yesterday after that 4-1 defeat to relegation-threatened Bournemouth. That win for Bournemouth sees them move to within 3 points of Watford in their bid to beat the drop. Leicester boss Brendan Rodgers said his team made too many mistakes in the second half.
And all the time I've been here, I mentioned during the week about the strength of mentality in this team. The second half we were too soft in too many ways, and that was the big disappointment. So to end up losing, 4-1, it was a big surprise, especially after the first half.
Elsewhere yesterday, Aston Villa boosted their chances of Premier League survival with a 2-0 win against Crystal Palace. Tottenham beat Arsenal by 2-1 in the North London derby, coming from behind in that game as well. And Wolves were comfortable 3-0 winners against Everton. Manchester City will discover the outcome of their appeal against a 2-year ban from European club competitions this morning. The ban follows alleged breaches of club licensing and financial fair play regulations. City have always denied any wrongdoing, and their appeal against the punishment was heard over 3 days by the Court of Arbitration for Sport last month. That decision is set to be published on the CAS website in around 5 minutes' time, in fact, from 9:30 this morning, so very close to that news. Leeds have a 3-point advantage at the top of the Championship this morning. They moved a step closer to getting promotion to the Premier League with a 1-0 win at Swansea City yesterday. It was their first match, of course, since club legend Jack Charlton passed away at the age of 85 on Friday. Meanwhile, speaking on OTB Sports yesterday, you heard him a bit earlier, but Brian Kerr paid tribute to Charlton, saying he changed the way soccer was perceived in this country.
His job description was to get results, and he got results, and the whole country enjoyed it, and his legacy will be there forever. His impact and his legacy will rightfully be celebrated. What happened after that time was that soccer clubs, it became very popular and very acceptable in areas of the country where only Gaelic games were ever really played to any level.
And you can read Brian Kerr's full thoughts on Jack Charlton on otbsports.com, or even better on the OTB Sports app, which you can download now for free on the App Store or the Play Store. Some golf news as well this morning. Colin Morikawa won his second PGA Tour title in just his 24th pro start after he beat Justin Thomas in a playoff at the Workday Charity Open yesterday. Morikawa won on the third playoff hole, forcing the extra play after the overnight leader Thomas had dropped shots on 2 of the last 3 holes of his final round. Graeme McDowell was best of the Irish, meanwhile, in Ohio on 5 under par, with a closing round of 72, while Shane Lowry hit a 69 yesterday to finish on 4 under par. Lewis Hamilton is just 6 race wins away from equalling Michael Schumacher's all-time Formula 1 record of 91. The world champion eased to victory in yesterday's Styrian Grand Prix in Austria. Hamilton's Mercedes teammate Valtteri Bottas came home second, ahead of the Red Bull of Max Verstappen in third. And finally, for me this morning, lads, Wycombe Wanderers attempt to seal a place in the second tier of English football for the first time in their 133-year history this evening. They take on Oxford behind closed doors at Wembley. That's in the League One playoff final. Oxford needed penalties to get past Portsmouth in the semi-finals, while Wycombe beat Fleetwood 6-3 on aggregate.
All right, good stuff, Shane. Thanks very much for that. More from Shane across the day here on OTB Sports. Going to be back with Phil Egan in the next few minutes about the Manchester City situation. But first, a comment from Gerard McCann. Sad to hear the passing of Jack Charlton. I have such great memories from the '94 World Cup campaign. The joy that he and the boys brought to the nation was and is immeasurable. Jack Charlton's legacy really is something else.
We've had some great days and great nights and good memories. I hope that the people of Ireland have got... I know that they've got the memories. I know they cherish them, and I know that they've enjoyed the days that when they've done something that they've never done before. They go to a World Cup as part of it a couple of times. They've enjoyed that, and the European Championship.
Thank you for the days, those endless days, those sacred days you gave me.
The president phoned me and said, would you like the job is yours if you'd like it, and I said I would like it. End of story.
I won't forget a single day, believe me.
Well, you know, we're 28-1, I think, we're quoted as, and we're not expected to do anything in this competition. We just hope to surprise a few people.
This kick by Sanson, in goes Aldridge, and Houghton! 1-0! And Ray Houghton has stopped the breakthrough! And Jack Charlton cannot believe it!
Nowadays, you see, they've changed it. Everybody in Europe does a little bit of what we did. Everybody in Europe. But they've changed the name, the FIFA guys. They call it pressing. Because they don't want to tell us that we started it. We call it putting people under pressure.
Malta 0, Republic of Ireland 2, and history has been made in Malta. Jack Charlton achieving his victory. achieving his ambition.
We've qualified for the go to Italy and we've done it ourselves. I'm absolutely delighted, not only for me, for our lads and for all the fans, everything.
The nation holds its breath. Yes, we're there!
And then I saw David come in, and I'm not the greatest believer in centre-backs taking penalties. And then David went back, put the ball down again, and went, sent the goalkeeper away and put it in, and it went fantastic. We're in the last 8 for the first time in my history, and it's magic. I'm delighted for the lads. And good luck to the people back home. Right. Hope they have a good time. Burton came to me and he said, our boss, he said, when we get to Rome, you'll get us in to see the Pope, won't you? Well, that was where the final was going to be played, and I don't think they'd a prayer again to the final. Right. Our game of the people. We prepared properly. We had a little bit of sun. We ate well. And we drank very little. We're going to change that tonight.
You see, it's a bit like religion, isn't it? And football's a bit like religion, isn't it? And he'd be like a sort of, I suppose, be like a pope or a bishop or something. He would.
But easy, onto it comes Houghton, and Houghton with a shot, and it's there!
I went into the players and we just sat in the dressing room and we were getting changed and everything, and then somebody come and said to me, would you come out back on the pitch? I said, what for? He said, the crowd won't go home. I just remember, I just cried. It was time for me to leave. I'd been there for 10 years and it was time for me to leave. And I did.
Yeah, the montage, all the fields, top quality work putting that together. And, what a big, huge, meaningful life. Like, 1 million different lives lived there. Again, the fact that he was a World Cup winner, the fact that Giles said he was the best centre-half in the championship for 5 seasons in a row, up against Bobby Moore. This is that was a career that, because his brother was a better and more famous and more storied player, he probably didn't get a lot of credit as a player that he would have deserved, and even that would have been a great career. But the other thing, Owen, that was clear from that was the timing. Like, there's 500,000 people, and in fairness, they are all going to laugh at whatever jokes you make, but the beat in between we're going to change that tonight, was just like, this guy, he's got the meaning out of the palm of his hand.
Yeah, it's remarkable. Like, it is something that, like, I thought, I didn't expect it to be one of the first things touched on, his footballing career, but I think it's actually kind of an important strand in how Jack Charlton managed as well. The fact that, as we said earlier on, he was the first person to admit that he wasn't the best player in any team that he played on, that he is somebody who had to graft hard, who got better and better and was possibly at his best at some point in his late 20s, early 30s. And I don't know, that sort of realisation that there is a way of getting the best out of yourself, that realisation was probably hammered home in the Ireland team as well. Like, these are all important threads and they all tell us so much about him, but it is kind of remarkable that the 66 thing is so well down the list of things that you think of when you think of Jack Charlton.
Yeah, it's like 9:32 here this morning on OTB AM. We're actually just waiting now for the Court of Arbitration for Sport website to update with the decision, the press release on their verdict.
I've got the media release here, and the CAS decision is that in their typically wordy language, exclusion from participation in UEFA club competitions lifted, fine maintained, but reduced to €10 million. So CAS has issued this decision of the procedure. The case concerns an appeal filed by Manchester City and the decision in which it was deemed to have contravened the FFP and sanctions with exclusion from the UEFA club competition. So the CAS panel deliberated and have concluded that the decision issued on February 14th should be set aside and replaced by the following: that they have contravened Article 56 and that they shall pay a fine of €10 million within 30 days as from the date of issuance of the arbitral award. So the ban from UEFA competitions, it seems, has been lifted.
City are back.
They did not disguise equity funding as sponsorship contributions, but did fail to cooperate with the UEFA authorities. That is the top line this morning from the CAS release. So who cares about the €10 million?
Chump change.
Got off scot-free. €10 million would buy you a year of Jesse Lingard, and that's about it.
Chump change. So suddenly the top four, the race for the top four is far more important. I actually thought that there was like almost no prospect of this happening. I kind of had resigned myself to the fact that this was going to be the fifth spot was going to be qualifying for the Champions League, and now all of a sudden that is not the case. So the race for the Champions League hots up significantly, and you've got to say this is not great for financial fair play and for the future of football, where this type of stuff is, going to not result in teams getting kicked out. What's the point of having your rules? We've seen this. If you don't have sanctions, everybody breaks them. And it turns out the sanction isn't actually for anything that they did. The sanction is for not cooperating.
I can remember we had Sam Lee of The Athletic on when this story first broke, in February, and he was making the point that Manchester City were supremely confident of their case. I guess when you've got as much money as Manchester City, you can be supremely confident of a lot of things. It's interesting that the initial ban seemed like this huge seismic moment in financial stories and the financial engine running European football. And now all of a sudden, when you actually dig into it, when push comes to shove, the whole case actually crumbles. So I'd be very interested in what actually comes out of this, the explanation of all of this, what Manchester City's case was.
The reasoned decision, yeah.
The reasoned decision, all that sort of thing. Because this is bad news, really, for football in general, really, if rules have been skirted and they've got away with it. But obviously, according to CAS, they haven't broken any rules. And again, just to go back to it, they didn't disguise equity funding as sponsorship contributions, which is not how it seemed at the start, but they did fail to cooperate with the UEFA authorities. So the only thing they've got done on this morning is failing to cooperate. But there was no disguising of funds.
Phil Egan,
contributions.
Phil Egan, good morning to you. What are the ramifications of this for European qualification, for the future of Manchester City and their empire?
Yeah, this is a great morning for Manchester City. Not such a good morning for Leicester and Brendan Rodgers, I think, because obviously when Manchester United beat Southampton this evening, Leicester are going to be out of the top four. And the general feeling all season has been, well, since February, fifth place is going to get you that Champions League spot. But obviously that's gone now. And we know Manchester City obviously are going to finish second. So, yeah, that puts more pressure on the likes of Chelsea and Leicester. Obviously, there's pressure on Manchester United, but out of those three teams I mentioned, United are banging form, and they're looking at third place tonight if they beat Southampton. But do you know what? I think a lot of us felt that this would be at least cut from 2 years to 1 year, and even if that was the case, it wasn't dead and buried that Manchester City would go back and say, right, it might be cut to a year, but we want it dropped altogether, and they don't even need that. The Court of Arbitration for Sport have obviously ruled that it's overturned. 10 million is really nothing to Manchester City. I mean, that's think of what they could do to their sponsorship with that one,
It means that everybody's going to stay who might have been a target. It means that they can reinvest this summer. It means that they're back, essentially.
Yeah. Like Pep Guardiola obviously had said he was going to honour his contract. That runs out next summer. So obviously, we'll see how the season goes. How it impacts next season, because I was trying to think about this before I came on with you, and we didn't know the decision. What would a reduction to a year have done? Because given what's happened with COVID-19, it probably actually would have been easy enough for City to keep their players, because they'd say, look, next season's Champions League and next season is going to be completely condensed because of COVID-19. The season starts a bit later. Do you really want to leave when there's so much uncertainty in terms of what's going on at the moment? Just see it out for a year. Whereas obviously if it was 2 years, we heard earlier in the season that Kevin De Bruyne had hinted, we'll have to look at things. But now Kevin De Bruyne knows that City will be in the Champions League next season. And, who knows, they could be defending the crown that they might win later on. Personally, I don't think they're going to win it. I think, since the restart, they've been good against certain teams, but they've also lost twice. And, I look at the possibility of them playing Juventus in a quarter-final, maybe even Bayern Munich in a semi-final. Those teams can be clinical, and Manchester City have struggled against teams that are clinical. And it's all well and good beating the likes of Brighton 5-0, but when you come up against the elite, you can't give them chances.
It's obviously seismic news. I think you're right, Phil. If it was reduced to 1 year, it would be similarly huge news. Because, like, you look at the players who were out of contract before 2023, there's not a whole pile to speak of. Like, Sergio Aguero's out of contract next summer. We know that David Silva and Nicola Otamendi are going to be out of the club this year. You get into the 2022 contracts, it's only really John Stones and Ederson. Ederson will be a big contract in 2022. That would have been the real complication next season. Yeah. But the likes of your De Bruyne, your Sterlings, your Gundogan's, your Gabriel Jesus's, your Mendy's, they're all contracted until 2023. So I don't think it actually makes a whole pile of difference in that regard that they're off as opposed to getting 1 year. But what it does mean is that Manchester City can now go on the offensive in the transfer market. This year it's not just about solidifying contracts, keeping players at the club. They can go out and spend big because, let us face the facts here, there hasn't been any real big punishment handed down for overspending at any point. Now, I'm not saying Manchester City would ever do that or
There's been none. There's been none. Financial fair play means nothing now. This is the end of financial fair play.
It has to be, yeah.
It does not work. It doesn't mean anything. What's happened here is that they have been able to generate massive amounts of money from sponsorship deals. Bear in mind, Manchester City, and whenever it happens, perhaps Newcastle will end up essentially representing a nation state. And if money is allowed to sluice into the system the way it has been, then there is immediately a competitive imbalance. The one check on that was supposed to be financial fair play. And now it turns out the Court of Arbitration for Sport have found that despite all of the evidence that was available, there has not been money sluicing into the system through made-up sponsorship deals. That's what the Court of Arbitration of Sport have said. So those rules that were supposed to protect against what appears to have happened now can't actually find legally that that did happen. So financial fair play hasn't done the job it was supposed to do, which is preventing massive amounts of money being injected into the system. Financial fair play is over. That's what's happened here. Manchester City have issued a statement. I'm just going to read it to you. While Manchester City and its legal advisors are yet to review the full ruling of the Court of Arbitration for Sport, the club welcomes the implications of today's ruling as a validation of the club's position and the body of evidence that it was able to present. The club wishes to thank the panel members for their diligence and the due process that they administered. This is an amazing day for Manchester City to have got to this point, to have been through all the stuff that they've been through, and now to be away essentially scot-free. 10 million quid means nothing to them. And the fine is not for anything to do with any of the sponsorship deals. The fine is to do with how they responded to the investigation. That is absolutely sensational. And the fact that they can play in the Champions League, there's no asterisks beside the record. It's not going to be Manchester City were unable to defend the title if they won the title because they were kicked out. Like, I don't know how Liverpool are feeling today. I don't know how other clubs are feeling about this, Phil.
Well, Liverpool are probably thinking, like, the fact that they've gone up against this machine that is Manchester City and they've absolutely dwarfed them in terms of the points tally. I mean, Liverpool can be sitting here this morning thinking they're pretty happy with themselves that they've actually been able to take on a team like Manchester City with all the resources that Manchester City have, and they've beaten them. And you know, they'll fancy the chances of doing the same again next season. But that recruitment, you look at the deficiencies in the Manchester City team, they haven't replaced Vincent Kompany in terms of a leadership role. You know, he played pretty well towards the end of last season, but there is defenders out there that are better than the version you got of Vincent Kompany last season. But they can go out now and get another centre half. They can go out maybe and get a better left back. They can go out and probably get a better striker. That Sergio Aguero obviously is world class, but he's been injured a lot. Gabriel Jesus isn't a like for like replacement. He tends to operate better in a wider role. So this is what they can do. And now that they have the clearance to do so, if they are Champions League winners as well, I mean, who's not going to want to go to Manchester City if you're a player somewhere else around Europe where basically they can say, look, we run this game now, we can do whatever we want.
Phil, good stuff. Phil Egan with us, responding to the news that Manchester City are going to pay a €10 million fine, but they will be playing in next season's Champions League and the Champions League after that, and the year after that, and the year after that, and the year after that, because they have all the money in the world. And they're going to be able to spend it. 9:43 this morning here on OTB AM. OTB AM live in association with Gillette. We don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters. We're going to pay a proper testimony to the career of Barry Geraghty next as Hector Ó joins us in just a moment. First, though, let's hear from Mick McCarthy, who joined us on OTB this weekend to pay tribute to Jack Charlton.
How will you remember Jack, Mick? He gave the country some marvellous days as Republic of Ireland manager.
I remember him as the bloke that gave me the best time of my life in football.
You were an Irish international before he came along. What do you remember of your early interactions with him, Mick?
When he first came into the job?
Yeah.
He made it plain and simple what he wanted. And, I know he sometimes gets remembered as this long ball game, but he was very tactically aware, Jack, and he was the one that turned a team of, a group of good players into a team that was a real force to be reckoned with, and a team that qualified for 88, 1994, or the country that did. But he galvanised the team. He made it simple. He knew what to do. He knew how to do it. He knew what the opposition didn't like. And he simplified it. And it just made it, I said he turned some of the good players that we had into really great players, international players.
I think the day that kind of put us on the map, Mick, was Euro 88 in Stuttgart when we beat England. And from that moment on, I think we always kind of felt as supporters, and I don't know about you as a team, that we'd always find a way to win or to get through.
Yeah, the team spirit was incredible. The willingness to work for each other, the togetherness. And that was, Jack created that, and that was with him, but that was with the country as well. That was with the fans. The sense of belonging to that squad, to that team, and that time of the fans and the country was just amazing.
Yeah, great stuff from Mick McCarthy in conversation with John Duggan on Saturday. You can get the full podcast available on the OTB Podcast Network. It's 9:45 this morning. The other big news over the course of the weekend was that Barry Geraghty's time in the saddle is up. He has had an absolutely sensational career, and I'm delighted to welcome Hector Ó to the show to talk to us about that. Hector, before I get to Barry Geraghty, I just wanted to get your impressions and memories of somebody who grew up and came to adulthood at the same time as Ireland were bestriding the game like a colossus.
Came to adulthood for the biggest party in Ireland. Man, it's been an emotional weekend, I think, for the whole country. Losing, he's like a grandfather of football for us, and it brings us all back to those great days, and everyone will remember where they were for Italia 90. I was living in Ballybrack, 32 Watson Road. It was Killiney on my postal address, but I was really in Ballybrack. I always told people in Navan that I was living in Killiney. They thought we were very posh, and it was within walking distance to the graduate pub, and myself and the brother and a few mates that were sharing a house would religiously make the journey up to the graduate, get in early, get a spot, and by the end of proceedings, we'd be dancing on top of tables, and it would spill out into the car park, and it just was an incredible time. And he brought us an incredible journey, and he will be long, long remembered for what he did for Irish soccer and for the people of the country.
That's the thing, isn't it? That it's not just a soccer story, really. It becomes a story of who we are, kind of growing up as a country and talking about ourselves. And look, it's not the only thing that was happening at that time. There was loads of weird social forces happening, and the country was changing, and they kind of surfed that wave.
Yeah, look, the music was coming out of Manchester with the Stone Roses and Spiral Carpets, the Happy Mondays. It was a really cool time, music-wise, anyway. And then the lads went on this journey. They didn't play great football, but who cares about at the end of the day what style we play? Maybe we're always looking at, they didn't play a great style of football or whatever, but by God, they gave us drama. And without Jack Charlton and the journeys that he brought us on to America and to Italy and to the Euros, there would have been no Poznan. There would have been no 25,000 fans in the main square in Poznan. And I spent 3 weeks at the Euros in 2012, and I did a breakfast show every morning at 7 o'clock in the morning over there on radio. And there would have been none of that. There would have been none of that mass emigration of fans getting behind. It was a lot more than football and what was played on the pitch. I mean, if you look at the Euros in 2012, the football was terrible, absolutely terrible. But we had the crack, we had fun, and we were all together, and nobody gave a shite for a few days together. And that's what Jack brought everyone. The country stopped. The country came to a standstill. And sport is one of the only things, possibly the only thing, that can bring this country to a standstill. And there's not many countries around the world that you can say that. And when Jack and those boys were playing, when the Irish team were playing back then, the country came to a standstill. The only other day like that is the All-Ireland final, or something huge with Irish rugby. And it just shows you how much we need sport in our DNA.
The sport of racing, and in particular the Cheltenham Festival, is something that has a very, very special hold on Irish sports culture. And in the midst of that, one of our best performers there ever is Barry Geraghty, who time and time again would end up as the leading Irish jockey or the leading jockey at the Cheltenham Festival in those big races. And he kind of slipped out the back door at the weekend.
Yeah, and you know what? It's becoming a little bit of the norm, the way the boys are doing it now. Ruby Walsh, he had discussed it with his family. He wanted to go out in a big winner. He told nobody. Willie Mullins, if you look at that interview in Punchestown, straight after he retired after winning the Irish Gold Cup, he was flabbergasted, shocked. Media was shocked. But they're doing it on their own terms. Tony McCoy finally got out in his own terms as well. This is the changing of the guard, the changing of the old guard. And now another warrior, another general of the Irish jockeys has retired early, 40 years of age. But you know what? What a career, what a jockey, and he what else was there to do on the CV? And if you look at the CV on Wikipedia, as I'm sure tens of thousands of racing fans and sports fans are looking to see how much he won, your thumb would be sore flicking the pages on Wikipedia to see how many big wins Barry Geraghty had. And that's the difference with these guys. And it's such a demanding sport mentally and physically. It's such a hard toll on the body over all those years. But the big jockeys on the big days could always deliver the goods. Barry Geraghty rode 5 winners in Cheltenham in 2003. He rode 5 winners in 2020. And I think he said to himself, I can do no more. Everything he touched in Cheltenham this year turned to gold. It was a magnificent week for Barry. And I'd say now he said, right, I have the big one on the CV as well. I've got the Grand National. And no matter how many Cheltenham wins you have, no matter how many champion hurdles you've won, the big one for every jockey, and they would all say this, is the Grand National. And he achieved that on Monty's Pass in 2003 for a small trainer down the south of the country, Jimmy Mangan, backed in from 40s to 16s. And that was another one on the CV. But Barry Geraghty, he bows out as one of the greatest sportsmen and greatest jockeys of all time.
He's part of a generation as well. As the other thing is that very frequently these groups cluster together where there's not that much separating each other, and sheer bloody mindedness and competitiveness drives each other on to a level of greatness that you kind of see between Federer and Nadal. They've dragged Djokovic up to that level as well. Like himself and Ruby and McCoy, they were all slightly different in terms of what they were all trying to achieve. But you can be sure, while they were friends, they were trying to slit each other's throats again and again and again on the track.
Oh, I know. It's like these boys. It's very. Look, I love my horse racing, and I love the flat and the jumps. The stuff the jumps boys go through, and the breakages of bones, and the ruptured spleens, and the punctured lungs. I mean, these guys are warriors, and it sets them apart. The flat boys do get injuries, but nothing compared to the National Hunt jockeys. But not all we've got a huge amount of top National Hunt jockeys in this country. But there's only a couple of them that can go to the higher level, that can go to the top of the top. And those are the guys that after years of hard slogging, years of getting up and getting to the races, don't make mistakes on the big horses on the big day. And when they're given an opportunity by a trainer, I mean, Barry Geraghty had to start off somewhere. Ruby Walsh had to start off somewhere. They didn't mess up on the big day. That put them in the shop window to get better rides. When bigger trainers and better rides and bigger owners get involved with a jockey, that might means the quality of the engine on that horse gets better. Barry Geraghty got better and better and better, and therefore he was riding better horses in bigger races. But on the big day, when it came to Cheltenham, did he make mistakes? 9 times out of 10, he delivered the goods, and that's why his CV is so illustrious. I mean, 4 champion hurdles. He's won King George's, Cheltenham Gold Cups. It's all there. It's incredible. The difference with these boys is on the big day, they deliver the goods for the owner, for the trainer. And there's no better image than, and I've been there many times, Moscow Flyer. To win on Moscow Flyer or to win on any Irish horse, but when you come back into the cauldron in Prestbury Park in Cheltenham and there's 20,000 people around the parade ring, and the tricolour is thrown up on the back of the horse, and Barry lifts it, and they spread out the tricolour, they open it up, and they walk back into this amphitheatre, and the majority of punters there are Irish. It's an incredible moment. It's there Croke Park, it's there Wembley, and it's Barry did that many, many, many times, and I think you can take some fond memories of what he'd done. But the thing that sets these guys apart, and we've lost another great one as well now. Davy Russell is the only one left in the dressing room. He's like the last of that group. But Barry can sit back to this morning and say, well, I have 6 rashers, 4 sausages, 3 fried eggs, a lovely bit of brown bread and a pot of tea. He doesn't have to worry about his weight anymore.
It is an incredible life that they put themselves through, and the difficulty to get to the point where you're constantly obsessed about your weight, and at the same time you're trying to heave this ton of horse flesh around while everybody else is doing the exact same thing, trying to beat you, and to be the very best and to deliver horses at just the right moment with that internal clock that he has. Yes. is a sensational thing. Just one last thing on this. 5 winners in 03. I think he was sports person of the year, and I think Ruby was never sports person of the year, as far as I remember looking back on a roadshow, and Barry Geraghty actually managed to kind of wrestle horse racing to the level of the public sporting consciousness for a period, and that's very important for the sport and for the industry, that it actually gets the support that it deserves. But we take for granted now that he can just show up at Cheltenham in 2020 and have 5 winners, when in the 80s and 90s we were getting 1 winner or no winners or 2 winners or 3 winners as a whole country, and here he has 5.
Yeah, look, it's the World Championships and 43 winners in Cheltenham. There was no better jockey on the course. I mean, if you look at all his winners this year, they were all French-named horses apart from Champ. He'll always be remembered for lifting Champ this year over the line. The only other jockey I ever physically saw, I've never seen a jockey get off a horse and physically lift him over a line yet, because it's all down to the horse. In tandem with that great pilot behind was Wichita Lyman and Tony McCoy, but possibly Champ was one of the greatest rides of all time to get him up from a hopeless position. But Barry Geraghty, he did. 2003. Where were we in 2003? And as you say, going to Cheltenham, we might get the odd winner. But this has become the norm, and these guys have broken the mould. And these guys, we were going over, stealing the British Thunder, stealing the Sterling. We were going over with our Irish Raiders, and these were our Cucullins heading over, our best jockeys on the best horses to take home the money back to Ireland. And the boys did it in buckets between Ruby and them. It's just very interesting now. There was a video floating around yesterday of Davy Russell. I don't know if you saw it or if you saw it on OTB, but it was him at the start of a race, and he was giving out to a young jockey going, "Now listen, you're not at a point. So he was effing and blinding and telling him at the start, don't walk, don't run. He was showing these younger jockeys, and it's a live video of Davy Russell at the start of a race telling young jockeys not to break the tape. Davy Russell is the only senior voice left in that weigh room. How long will he keep going? We don't know. These boys are super fit. Barry could have kept going, but I'm sure Barry said, I've had enough of the broken legs. I've had enough of the ruptured spleens. He had the worst break of his life last year in April on Peregrine Run. He broke the tibia and the fibia, I think, on one leg. It was a horrific break. But when we say these words like ruptured spleen, punctured lung, these guys take this on the chin. Not only the Barry Geraghty's, the Ruby Walshes and the Tony McCoys, but all the young jockeys around the country. They're all daredevils, they're all warriors, and we will produce the new ones. We do have Mark Walsh, we do have Paddy Kennedy, we do have Paul Townend. There's a new brigade coming through, and we are very blessed in this country that we're producing the best young jockeys on the flat and the national hunt every single year. There was one last thing I wanted to just ask you about, Hector. You're involved in Club GAA. How's that actually been? What's that been like? Getting lads back training and... I've never seen the growth like it. I'm coaching under 16s here in Claregalway. I've never seen growth like it. It was as if they were given miracle growth during lockdown. There's lads that I saw last year when we finished the under 15 league who have turned into men during lockdown. 4, 5, 6 inches on shoulders and heads, and maturity and height. There are lads that were even putting in midfield that we never dreamt could have played midfield. But on the flip side, it's great to be back, steady as we go. We are trying to go through the protocol. but there's a lot of other auxiliary things happening around the country at the moment that are jeopardising where we are with the GAA. We've just got to go steady as we go, but it's great to get back. The pitches of the country look brilliant. We've had some nice weather. We've had some greasy ball as well. It's been wet on a couple of occasions. But just physically to get back, to bring that bag of balls onto the ground and throw them on the pitch, 20 size 5s, and let them at it. The first day we came back there, they were like a pack of hyenas ravaging the balls. It couldn't. It was like something you see in the Nationals, David Attenborough out on the plains of the Serengeti with these size 5s. But they're happy to be back, and I'm sure all over the country, steady as we go, we can't let up. What is working well is the return to play app. When you press to say your child's temperature, or your teenager, or you as a coach, return to play, everything okay. That all the technology and that app is working fine. So that's a big plus as well for clubs around the country. But steady as we go, because we are still in a difficult world.
Good stuff, Hector. Thanks a million.
Good to meet you, lads. Mass more.
Hector Ó there giving us some thoughts on the end of Barry Geraghty's career as a jockey. It's going to be very interesting to see his next steps, but certainly a massive changing of the guard in terms of racing, with Tony McCoy gone, Ruby Walsh gone, and as he says, just Davy Russell left as the senior voice in the weigh room. That means opportunity for loads of people to step up and become the retained jockey for JP or whoever into the future. So we'll talk a good bit more about that on Friday Night Racing. On Friday, obviously, we're here at the start of the week on Monday, and we're still reflecting back on the passing of Jack Charlton. It's been our main story this morning. Great stuff from Gary Breen. If you missed it, you can get it back on the OTB Podcast Network. And we'd love to hear from you. 087 9180 180 is the number. Now, a reminder, this Friday at 1 o'clock, we're going to be giving you another chance to win €1,000 in our new game show, Know Your Football. The prize fund has been... it's still a grand, obviously, next week. So we had a winner last Friday. You can register on the following link, quiz.otbsports.com. That's quiz.otbsports.com. Just log in before 1 o'clock on Friday to play along, and we'll be on air from about 12:30 talking about the big football stories over the course of the day. Now, Sam Lee of The Athletic is going to join us in a moment to chat about the decision of the Court of Arbitration for Sport to overturn Manchester City's Champions League ban and reduce their fine to €10 million. It is a significant development, really, when essentially Manchester City had been accused of using sponsorship deals to boost their revenue when those deals might not have actually been worth the figures that Manchester City were saying. That's the dummy's guide to what they had been charged with. And then there were a series of other auxiliary charges about not cooperating with investigations when it came to how UEFA were dealing with this. And Owen, it is very significant that when you are a club as wealthy as Manchester City, you're able to make these investments on the back of some of these sponsorship deals.
And if you are a football club who has made investments based on the back of the income that you have made as a club and have abided by financial fair play throughout the last decade, you've been made a fool of this morning, haven't you? Like, I remember Arsene Wenger talking about this in years gone by, the summer when Manchester City signed Kevin De Bruyne. Like, I'm sure Manchester City fans will say this was Arsene Wenger whinging about not having the financial muscle that Manchester City had. But I can remember him saying at that point that Arsenal's revenues have all come through while abiding by financial fair play rules, and at Chelsea and Manchester City and Paris Saint-Germain at the time as well, there were question marks around what they were operating at. But if you're Arsene Wenger this morning, for example, you're probably saying what a fool I was to sort of play by the rules at this point. But again, Manchester City fans will say that was sour grapes from Wenger at the time. Sam Lee of The Athletic is with us. Sam, good morning to you.
Yeah, hello, good morning.
Are you surprised by this decision, or did you expect that they would get essentially a full overturning with a 10 million fine?
No, I mean, we did a story ages ago, back in November, that City would not be banned from the Champions League. That kind of took a bit of a beating when they were initially, but the information was they thought they would be fine, and even if they weren't fine initially, they would get overturned at CAS. So that's what we've seen now. But I am still surprised, to be honest. I just felt that unless they had this overwhelming evidence, this irrefutable evidence that they always said they had, they would not be able to clear their name. And obviously we haven't seen any evidence of this evidence. They've kept it very private, but they've obviously used it where they needed to. And that's how they've ended up getting the ban overturned. So, I mean, I am surprised, even though that is what they insisted all along. I must admit, I am still surprised.
Where does it leave financial fair play as an instrument?
Well, I mean, I've answered this question once already. I'm still kind of, we're only half an hour after the decision. I'm still trying to toss a few ideas around in my head. I was about to tweet it now. Obviously, the initial reaction is, this is the death of financial fair play. But I mean, if... We don't know all the ins and outs yet. The full reasons for UEFA's verdict back in February weren't published, but they probably will be soon. And the full CAS award will come out in a few days as well. So then we'll know more. But if City have been cleared because there was this evidence they didn't do anything wrong in the first place, then it's not so much about FFP. It's more about UEFA kind of leading a flawed investigation. Where did they get their evidence? What evidence do they have at all? These kind of things. I would think that's more kind of a slight on UEFA's reputation and the reputation of the investigatory chamber rather than FFP itself. But the other element in the CAS press release today was that City partly got it overturned because some of the elements were time barred, which may mean, and again, we don't know until everything comes out, but that may mean that City were guilty of what they were accused of, but it happened more than 5 years ago, so it didn't matter. So that might be another twist in the tail when all these awards are published later in the week. And if that's the case, then maybe it's more of a problem for FFP. But at the moment, I certainly could be wrong, because FFP will be questioned now. But I think it's more an issue of UEFA's reputation and what made them feel they could go after City. I think people need to look at the PSG verdict again and why they decided not to go after PSG. I think they need to look at all of that and then kind of point fingers at UEFA to an extent, more than FFP itself. Maybe they need to change the time barred situation.
Yeah. So essentially, if you
broke the rules more than 5 years ago, then that you're fine. Basically, that's what time barred is in this case.
Yeah. So we're speculating a little bit about it. So it says I'm just going to get the exact line about the time bar. The CAS award emphasised that most of the alleged breaches reported by the adjudicatory chamber of the CFCB were either not established or time barred. So we don't know what was not established and what was time barred, but certainly if any aspect of it is time barred, well then, it's almost like we did this thing and we got away with it. In that instance, all you have to do is be good at hiding how you're getting away with this stuff. Wait a few years and your crimes fritter away. You essentially get away with them. That's the essence of that. And it's hard to see financial fair play making a comeback if it's so hard to prove these cases, and it's going to take so long because you're up against the richest clubs in the world and the might of the best lawyers in the world.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair to say. I mean, it's difficult to know what elements were time barred. I mean, maybe it was something that was quite inconsequential. It's difficult to say now without finding out what that was, and we should find out in a few days. So if you want to call me back, we'll have a proper chat about it then feel free. I mean, it is difficult now to kind of speculate on that. But yeah, if, as you say, if they were the big elements of that, and CAS have decided that it happened more than 5 years ago, then yeah, it is difficult to enforce then, because if you've been able to hide it for long enough, then you're essentially okay. But I mean, for now, we don't know that. There may have been nothing major to hide. There may have just been a couple of little trifling issues around the edges. They may have been big issues. But to be fair, we do need to remember that the other part of the CAS statement was there was no evidence for it. It was either there was no evidence for it or it was time barred. So we can't kind of throw the other half out of it, because that is a significant factor in City's favour, of course.
Absolutely, 100%. I guess the issue really, when you boil it back down in terms of financial fair play, so much of the success or failure of financial fair play as a mechanism for preventing clubs from just accessing the super wealth to buy league titles and trophies, it requires incredible levels of financial auditing or self-declaration. And we know from real life that people tend not to self-report if they are butting up against rules and they break them from time to time. So as a concept, I wonder if financial fair play is now going to come under consideration. Is this the right way? We're essentially asking the clubs to tell us how they're earning money and how they're spending that money, and we're trusting them a little bit when it comes to that. I mean, obviously you can send in auditors and try and use forensic auditing firms to establish exactly how money is being spent. But again, you're up against the best accountants and lawyers in the world.
I mean, I suppose if you put it that way, it's flawed in the extent that you may be asking people who are breaking the rules, to kind of self-report, and it's not going to happen. That's the way of the world. But there is no alternative. And in terms of, I suppose, defending financial fair play from that accusation is what would be better. Like if you were of the view that financial fair play is a good thing and should be there, and it does a lot of good for the game, but it doesn't go far enough, how much further could you go? Like if clubs were willing, hypothetically, if clubs were willing to break the rules and not declare what they were doing, how could you stop them doing that? You know, like you say, there are auditors. The club have got auditors. They're external auditors as well. You know, UEFA will, I think they've got quite extensive powers to investigate as well. So, I mean, even, I suppose in the UEFA's defence, could they be criticised for not going far enough? I'm not sure how much further they could actually go.
Yeah, and maybe that's the issue.
That's the nature of the game.
It is, isn't it? I wonder what the other clubs who are competing against Manchester City and potentially Newcastle in future think about how, because a baseline for the value of these sponsorships has now been established, it seems, in some way. Again, we've got to wait for the reasoned decision, but if Manchester City say that they can get 300 million or whatever it was for the title sponsorship here and this shirt sponsorship there and this piece of advertising hoarding, then they're not going to go back on that. Those figures aren't going to come down.
No. I suppose the only other thing to say as well, if we're looking at, like, now there's going to be a light shine properly on the UEFA themselves, the investigatory chamber and financial fair play. And again, this may be boosted in the next couple of days if there's an element of City having done wrong that comes out, but they've been able to get away with it for being time-barred. If that is the case, then people will be using that to look at UEFA again. But I think it's a good time now, if we are shining a light on all of these things, to look again at why PSG weren't punished in the same way. They were investigated, the same as City. It's basically, there's not an awful lot of coverage on it, but Tariq Pandya in the New York Times wrote a great piece on it. At the time, it might be 18 months ago now, maybe longer. Effectively, by the sounds of it, the same investigator looked at all the PSG stuff and said, how much are your sponsorships worth? And PSG said, oh, they're worth this much. And he went, are you sure? Yeah. And he went, well, fine then. Crack on. And that even annoyed the judge in charge of who would have handed down the punishment. He went, how have you come to this decision? It took him longer than 10 days to read through everything. He wanted to lodge an appeal against the investigatory chamber to say you should have investigated PSG. But because it took longer than 10 days, again, these UEFA statutes, they couldn't launch that appeal. So if we're going to look into FFP and everything now, and whatever may come from City later in the week when we get all the award, that PSG thing definitely needs looking at as well, because it seems like they didn't even, from what I've read, they didn't even bother to go as far as punishing PSG. They just kind of took their word for it. So if we go talking about all these measures about clubs regulating themselves, and if they're not going to play by the rules, you can't catch them, it seems like they didn't even want to catch PSG. So that's another element. If we're shining a light on everything, then there's certainly things that people should be looking at. You know, this isn't just a leave Man City alone thing. This is if we want FFP to be good, if you want UEFA to be fit and proper, then have a look at everything. I would say that's interesting.
Absolutely, and it probably leads us back to that fatal flaw of, like, we have to trust these businesses somewhat, or else you have to turn UEFA into an expert on the value of sponsorships globally, or they spend money with some company, and that company has to be independent. You know, there's probably ways around that, but it gets to a point where it becomes super complicated, and again, every layer of complexity offers an opportunity for the super clubs to use their wealth in a way to flout the rules and to come up with different things. We've seen it in tax policy. We've seen the world's biggest corporations pay less tax than some individuals in every state in the world because they understand and sometimes influence the writing of the policy. So the one thing in the statement today is that it says that we've found that City have been in breach of Manchester City FC have contravened Article 56 of the club licensing and financial fair play regulations. So they set aside the previous judgment and they've said, one, they've definitely contravened Article 56, and two, they're going to have to pay a fine of €10 million within 30 days to UEFA. Article 56 is about the licensee must cooperate with the licensor, that's the country and UEFA club financial control body in respect of their requests and inquiries. And it's essentially about providing the licensor and UEFA club financial control body with all necessary information. So this is what they found them guilty of not cooperating with their responsibilities, confirm that the submitted documentation and information are complete and accurate, and promptly notify the licensor in writing about any subsequent events that constitute a significant change to the information previously submitted to the licensor, including a change of legal form or legal group structure. They have found that City have not complied with the requests to cooperate, which is fairly embarrassing at one level. You know, I understand that they're getting away with not getting kicked out of European football, but that's essentially saying that they were not honest and fair in their dealings with UEFA and with financial fair play, which is pretty embarrassing at one level.
I suppose, I mean, do you read from that that's they're not cooperating in the sense that they haven't declared, you know, something to do with the sponsorship value, or is it just cooperating with the investigation? Because obviously the reason they've given the €10 million fine to City is because if you don't cooperate with UEFA, then, you know, that's breaking the rule and you should cooperate. But I think if City have said, why are they coming after us? Then maybe they're thinking, why haven't they gone after PSG? But regardless of that, why are they coming after us? We've got this evidence that we've not done anything wrong. And, you know, we may see that in the next few days. So why are we, like, they've obviously got, they're thinking, and we can pick holes in this or not, their thinking is UEFA have come for them unjustly from the start. And that's been obvious from their statements. At first they didn't want to get involved, then the statements got more kind of aggressive, and they said that UEFA were coming for them and it's an unfair process. So presumably they have felt it's an unfair process all the way along. They've just said, we're not going to bother with you at all. We're going to go to CAS and we'll sort it out there.
And CAS have now found that they haven't fulfilled the obligations of the rules, though. So that's what...
Well, yeah, but CAS have said, well, you didn't cooperate, and City will have gone, well, no, because we weren't going to bother, which is why they've got a €10 million fine, which is not nothing. You know, they haven't cooperated with those rules. But presumably City have thought, there's no reasoning here. Like there's no point to cooperate with you, which is it's against the rules. But they may have just thought, well, if you wait for leading a witch hunt against us, if that's what they think, and it seems like that's what they think, then I can understand why, even if they're in the wrong, why they have thought that.
They don't recognise the court, essentially.
Yeah,
you come into court and say, I don't recognise your authority over me. But like you're playing in the Champions League, which is a UEFA competition. You know, I can definitely see if I'm Manchester City's press department, or I'm making that point that we never felt that they had jurisdiction, and we felt we were being made an example of when there are other examples out there. It was unjust coming after us. The Court of Arbitration for Sport have said that you've definitely breached Article 56, which is you're supposed to cooperate with the company, with the sporting body that actually licenses your ability to play in their competitions.
Yeah, they have. And that's why they've got a €10 million fine, because they said it's a serious thing, but it's not serious enough to ban them from the Champions League for, which I think everybody would probably agree with. But then where you differ is obviously your point of view, which is more like, well, you've got to cooperate, and obviously you do. But like I say, even if City are in the wrong, I can imagine just me being in the same situation. If I felt I was being treated unfairly, and then the people who were treated me fairly wanted something from me, or to say, well, provide us this piece of evidence, I might say, well, what's the point? I'll go to somebody else. Like, it's not right, but that at least is understandable. Whereas, like, you know, the sponsorship, if they were guilty of that, you couldn't really put up too much of an argument to say that's understandable. But not cooperating, like I say, if we find in the next few days, the next few weeks, next few months that UEFA or the investigatory chamber aren't credible, because, like I say, this is hypothetical, but if they've gone after City and decided to not go after PSG, and there's stories all over the world about, actually, look at these links to him, look at these links to him, the whole thing's not fit for purpose, is anyone going to criticise City in the end for not cooperating with them? So just so we can say, well, maybe City did break the laws but got away with it because it was more than 5 years ago, we could also say, just completely objectively, if it's now discovered that UEFA aren't fit for purpose in terms of going after clubs and prosecuting them, why would, you know, you couldn't hold it against City, although they broke the laws and been fined for it.
Follow that through for a sec. So let's just say for a sec, Sam, that is a conclusion that a lot of people come to this week. What's next?
For financial fair play.
Well, for faith in UEFA, for faith in this competition to be run in any way that's actually fair. Like,
I know.
You think back to Real Madrid, right? Was it 2 decades ago? They were completely on their uppers, and the government wrote a check for a bit of land, and all of a sudden their debt disappeared, and that gave us the Galacticos era. Like, it's the type of stroke that happens in world football that was supposed to be finished. We were all supposed to, at the start of the year, think these are going to be the best 4 teams from the best 5 or 6 leagues around Europe, and they're going to play the best football with the best footballers, and at the end of it we don't know who's going to win. If actually that's not going to be the case into the future, what's going to happen?
I really don't know. You might get the case of, kind of similarly to the not cooperating thing, you might get people going, well, it's wrong, but we're going to do it anyway. You know, if we can't beat them, join them, kind of thing, which obviously isn't good for the game, but it's the same clubs who were up there earlier. So if, Liverpool, for example, or United, who won't presumably be happy with this ruling, they might just feel, well, if they're going to get away with it, we may as well. I don't think they actually will, but that could be a possibility for what comes next, this element of lawlessness about it. But I mean, this is the thing. There is no kind of perfect regulation, because even with FFP, the whole idea of it being non-competitive, that is the case. But also, I know as Miguel says a lot, if it wasn't in place, then you'd just have PSG and City and maybe Newcastle in future, whoever can be backed by a state or indirectly backed by a state, spending loads of money on whatever, and that's not viable either. We're going to need something else, I guess. But what could it be? I'd like to think I'd have an answer for your questions coming on here, but what's next for the governance of European football? I don't know. I really don't know what it could be.
Just one for me, Sam, just on the detail of the story. I see your athletic colleague Raphael Honigstein on Twitter saying it's a bit of a cheap shot to blame UEFA for being too slow off the mark, because he points out that the Der Spiegel story about alleged FFP infringements was from 2013 and it only broke in November 2018. So the detail is from 2013, broke in 2018 because of the 5-year statute limitations. Imagine the outcry, he says, if UEFA hadn't investigated. But so this is the case then. The infringements mostly took place in 2013, came out in Der Spiegel in 2018. In that case, and if UEFA were fully aware, and if CAS were fully aware of the fact that the detail was from 2013, why would they proceed with something knowing about the 5-year time bar?
I haven't seen this tweet. I'm trying to think. So, if UEFA knew about it in 2013, then
Der Spiegel would have known about it in 2013 and didn't. The infringements would have taken place in that year, and then broke the story in 2018. So, I know that we're still waiting for the reasoned decision here, but it seems that some of the infringements would have taken place up to 7 years ago at this point. I would imagine that the authorities would have known the dates, known the details getting into this, and known the fact that there would be a 5-year statute of limitations on.
Right, yeah, okay, I see what you mean. So it's more about the time barred thing. But the interesting thing about this is, and I mean, I'm a bit concerned now that I'm going to have City fans knocking on my door, because I spoke to a few legal experts about what might happen, and they all agreed. The 2 I spoke to in the article, and others as well that I consulted just to kind of be sure, they all agreed that the time barred thing wouldn't matter so much. That because of the way CAS looks at cases, which is de novo, the Latin term they use for it, which basically means, I suppose in layman's terms, what the experts were expecting was that they would say, CAS would say, well, this happened 5 years ago, but there was a good reason to actually go back and reinvestigate, and they did break the laws. They did break the rules 5 years ago. So despite the fact it was time barred, we're going to side with UEFA because they did break the rules. And that's what kind of in the legal circles, that's what they expected. And even after the case was conducted, I know in legal circles there were people thinking City have really dropped the ball there going after these kind of legal technicalities, because at CAS that doesn't really matter. So it's actually a surprise if you're kind of in those or having conversations with people in those legal circles. I think a lot of people in legal circles will be surprised that the time barred argument, if that's what City put forward, actually worked. So yeah, to go back to your question about why would UEFA pursue this if they didn't think it was going to work? I mean, that may be a surprise. And when we find out about the time barred element later in the week, there's certainly more to see from that. I find it interesting that, I don't know. I mean, if you get this information as Der Spiegel, if they had got the information in 2013,
would that have changed everything?
But I mean, if they did get it then, but they couldn't use it. Could they not have given it to UEFA anyway? And just in terms of investigative journalism, is that not something that could happen? I don't know. Maybe they didn't. Maybe I didn't understand the tweet correctly. But what I read from that was they knew this was going on at the time, but they didn't do anything about it until 5 years had passed, which seems strange. But maybe I've misunderstood that.
Sam, I know it's obviously a breaking story, and you're mad busy, so we're very grateful to you for making the time to come and just chat to us about this, which is definitely something that we all kind of need to think about, where the future of this is actually going to work and what kind of a tournament that we're going to be watching midweek for the next couple of years. But certainly we're going to be watching Man City play European football next season. That's the be-all and end-all at the end of this.
Yeah, it is. I suppose the actual football itself was probably one of the least important things here, because it would have been, well, are the players going to leave? Can they buy players in the transfer market? Obviously, the income, if it had been a 2-year ban, that, all of those things, is Guardiola going to leave? That would have been bigger. But now, I suppose we can focus on the football. But yeah, the football itself, the European football, City playing Shakhtar Donetsk away in the group stage again was probably the back of people's minds. But they can at least look forward to that, yeah.
Great to have you with us this morning. Thanks a million for being so generous with your time. It's Sam Lee from The Athletic there. You should look up that Tariq Panja piece that Sam referenced there. It's on the New York Times from actually exactly a year ago, essentially, July 24th, 2019. And it does look as if a lot of that stuff needs to be revisited. Remember the season that Mbappe joined PSG, and it's, you can afford Mbappe and Neymar. It's like, right, that's interesting. This is obviously... fair play to the accountants at PSG. They are very clever, and they've managed to be able to pull that off. So I don't know. What do you think in all this, Owen? Is your gut instinct that justice has been done or not?
Well, no. It's something that needs to be discussed with somebody who knows a hell of a lot more about legislation than I do, for sure.
Or not. So that's the thing, right? There will be legal argument about statute of limitations, the de novo, all that kind of stuff, right? But as a football fan, are you happy that Man City are playing European football next year?
Something doesn't sit right with me about this. The whole thing doesn't sit right with me, that investigations have happened that clearly were based in some sort of reality that Manchester City had broken rules in the past, and the prowess of their legal team has managed to overturn this. The reason why I said it's I'd like to hear from somebody with a bit more knowledge of the law than me, is just about this idea of the time-barred information. Like, how realistic is that to proceed in future cases with UEFA, especially if there is going to be statute of limitations on actual journalism as well, which seems to have been the case with the Der Spiegel article. Like, you're backing yourself into a corner where none of these things are going to be able to be followed through with. If that is the case, there's always going to be a 5-year time bar on these stories.
Well, you can change that. You make your own rules when it comes to... the statute of limitations is decided on a crime-by-crime basis. In criminal law, like, not all crimes have a statute of limitations. There's none on murder in Ireland, for example. You can't murder somebody and then after the statute of limitations go, hey, I'm clear. I murdered that guy and you can't do anything about it because it was 20 years. You can't do that. Whereas actually, there's loads of stuff where too much time has passed, that justice delayed would be justice denied, and blah, blah, blah. That's the principle behind it. But what you could do is grandfather in a rule that says, actually, we have decided that teams who are now reaping the reward of the millions and millions and millions that they have benefited from erroneously are going to be punished for that into the future.
Put it to you this way, like in an event, like, I'm not talking about any specific cases here, the next FFP story that breaks, say tomorrow you go out and spend 100 million quid on money that didn't come through organic revenue streams, that have come from an external sponsorship source. That probably gets leaked by somebody to a newspaper. When they get pissed off at the club in a year's time, 2 years' time, the newspaper then needs to check that legally, possibly a year before they actually get that out there. Then you're backed into a corner. And I'm talking about in the quickest case scenario here. UEFA are then in a situation where they need to get this thing signed, sealed and delivered, rubber stamped by CAS in a 2-year period. Yeah. That is if all these things happen so quickly. These are the confines with which these things need to happen. My very, as a football fan only take here is that the 5-year time bar seems hugely restrictive on UEFA and CAS ever being able to do anything in this case.
So it's nothing to do with CAS. It's as long as UEFA bring their course, yeah. So you don't need to get it through CAS. You just need to have done your own rules by that time. Look, it's we've gone way over today because the breaking news was so spectacular. It's 10:30. Mick Foley on Twitter has just tweeted that there is a statue of Jack Charlton in Cork already. Apparently it's in Cork Airport, which I didn't know about, although it rings a bell now that you mention it. And he says if there is one, it should be in Mayo for reasons of fact he loved the place. It turned the football team into something that wasn't just the preserve of the urban areas, and also the story of emigration. I think it's a brilliant idea, and I could certainly row in behind that. 087 918 180 is the number. If you haven't already got the OTB Sports app, that's the best place to get our live content. We stream live there, all of our shows. At 12 o'clock today, the latest episode of Off the Bench with basketball player Mimi Troy discussing the death of her mother and racism in Ireland. It's really, really powerful stuff. A James McLean interview from OTB Gold. The Ray Boom Boom Mancini interview is live from 6 o'clock tonight, and then Miguel Delaney is going to join Joe from 7 to talk about Jack Charlton, Monday Night Rugby, the football show, and much more as well. If you missed anything, catch it back on the podcast. We timestamp it for ease. It's 10:30. We've gone over. We'll see you tomorrow.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.